Chapter 6:18. Qing Zhan was still young. She was only a 12 or 13-year-old girl. She rarely saw her master get angry. Now that she saw this scene, she was a little confused. She was confused when she heard that His Highness wanted to talk to her about something. Did she do something wrong recently and His Highness wanted to drive her away? Someone wants you to go to the Holy Worship Palace. The young man's voice was cold, but it was not harsh. Instead, it was like high-quality porcelain that penetrated into people's ears. You should have received the news these few days. Qing Zhan nodded. She could not help but think of that evil and handsome face. The person who asked for you is young Master Lai. The young man said calmly. He has no other shortcomings. He just likes to hurt the maids. Be careful when you go there. If you feel uncomfortable, you can come back at any time. Qing Zhan's expression changed immediately. He likes to hurt the maids? Of course, if you don't want to, he won't force you. The young man swung his left hand that was bleeding and said calmly, he will only express his affection to you. This is his trick. It's the same to anyone. Qing Zhan thought for a while and her eyes dimmed. I know, young Master Lai has always been so loving. Your Highness, don't worry. I know what to do. Very good. The young man raised his thin lips. Go and get ready. You will go at night. Qing Zhan looked down and replied, yes. Shadow listened at the side the whole time. The expression on his face was indescribably weird. After Qing Zhan went out, he said tentatively, Your Highness, young Master Lai doesn't seem to be as unprincipled as you said. Other than teasing people, the rest of him was okay. Hearing this, the young man wrapped his hand with a white handkerchief and looked back at Shadow slowly. Shadow was speechless with just one look. There was no need to confirm anymore. His Highness was slandering young Master Lai. It was so obvious. Even if Qing Zhan went to the Holy Worship Palace, she would not change her opinion of young Master Lai. If young Master Lai was just a playboy in Qing Zhan's heart before, he was equivalent to a womanizer now. Like to lay hands on maids. This sentence was very ambiguous to begin with. At this time, Nangong Lai still didn't know anything. He was wearing a fur cloak and standing outside the hall, thinking about how to explain to people. Qing Zhan, who was dressed in a servant's uniform, walked out from inside. She was a young girl with a sword at her waist. She gave off a vibe that she was as green as a bamboo. Nangong Lai cleared his throat and said with a familiar evil smile, Little Qing Zhan, come here. I have something for you. Qing Zhan walked over, but her attitude was not as close as before. Instead, she said in a serious tone, Young Master Lai, His Highness has a rule that a death attendant cannot simply accept things from others. I know. You will listen to your Highness. Nangong Lai's words were a bit sour, and the corners of his mouth were half-hooked. However, you have to accept this thing. As he said this, he reached out and pulled the person. Just as he was about to snap his fingers, he wanted to send the roses out. Qing Zhan's subconscious reaction was to throw him to the ground with her back facing him. Hellion Vivian felt the pain as she watched from the side, and the corners of her mouth twitched. Nangong Lai's head was dizzy from the fall. As the world was spinning, he could only hear Qing Zhan's cold and crisp voice. Young Master Lai, please show some respect. I'm not one of your women, and I'm not as casual as you. Nangong Lai swallowed the confession that he had been thinking about the whole day back into his stomach. He knew that she would misunderstand. However, there was no need to throw him to the ground so hard. Why did he feel that something was not right? The way she looked at him, wasn't it a bit too disgusted? She used to be so shy. This was not right. Little Qing Zhan said to Hellion Vivian in a particularly righteous manner, Sister, young Master Lai likes to send flowers to people casually. You have to be careful. Nangong Lai was speechless. Since when did he like to send flowers to people? Did he, a priest, need to send flowers to anyone? The girls who were chasing after him had already lined up from the palace to the outside. Little Qing Zhan, you are really capable. Nangong Lai sneered. You even dared to throw me. If I want women, do I need to send flowers? Even if I don't say anything, they will come to me willingly. Initially, he thought that his words would be effective. Who would have thought that the other party only looked at him and said expressionlessly, I know? Then she disappeared into the fog. Nangong Lai held the anger in his heart. He waved his hand and the rose petals scattered all over the ground. How did this happen? The child was still very upset. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. There is a problem with your character, and what you said just now is really bad. Nangong Lai was sad. She was very easy to coax before, and she had a good impression of me. Hellion Vivian comforted him casually. It should be that she saw through your bad nature and suddenly realized it. Are you sure you are comforting me and not adding insult to injury? Nangong Lai still did not understand. What is going on? Hellion Vivian also could not figure it out. Logically speaking, Qingzhan should have liked this guy since they were young, but looking at it now, it did not seem like it. The two of them looked at each other with the same blank face. They squatted in the snow in a row, and their eyes were confused. The scene of the confession was not supposed to be like this, crack. The burning match in the heater made a muffled sound for the last time. The teenager wrapped the white bandage around his hand and listened to the report with a noble face. His thin lips curved. Qingzhan threw him out? Yes. The shadow guard knelt on the ground with one knee. After he finished, he looked up and hesitated for a while. Your Highness, do you want Qingzhan to apologize to Master Lai in the holy worship temple? Even the genius priest was thrown out. What if he hated her? No need. The teenager stood up. His eyes were deep and there was no fluctuation in his voice. Who asked Master Lai to give flowers? He deserved to be thrown out. The shadow guard did not understand. His Highness and Master Lai had always had a good relationship. Why was Qingzhan so rude this time and did not care? Did the two of them have a quarrel? The shadow guard was still guessing when the teenager said again, "Send the official business on the table to the holy worship temple. Say that it is urgent to deal with it." Send again? How many times had he sent it today? Even if Master Lai was a cat demon with 9 lives, he could not stand such torment. Nangong Lai could not stand the torment. That night, he secretly came to Beligaju's study room in the dark. His face was serious and remorseful. Aju, can you take it that my brother is begging you? What did I do to offend you? Can you just tell me directly? He was now suffering from both physical and mental torture. Little Qingzhan did not know what was going on. Seeing him was like seeing a disease. She hid far away. Was he so dirty? Chapter 619. The young man seemed to have just woken up. He was wearing a fur robe, and his black hair was messy. He drank a mouthful of tea, and his clear eyes carefully looked at Nangong Lai who had appeared in front of him. Without thinking, he kicked him. Of course, it was not a real kick. Otherwise, Nangong Lai would not be able to dodge it. But such a move was enough to make Nangong Lai scream. Aju, you are good. How could you treat your brother like this? Sorry, I was not awake just now. The young man looked down at the person lying on the ground. His posture was lazy and his voice was low. Nangong Lai was speechless. Not awake? Your eyes were so cold that it almost froze me to death. You are telling me that you are not awake? Are you lying to a fool? Aju, we have known each other for 7 years. Nangong Lai admitted that he was no match for this young man. He started to play the friendship card. 7 years? How many 7 years do we have in life? You can't treat me like this. You have to let me know before I die. Beligaju looked at him and smiled slowly, but there was no smile in his eyes. You seem to have a good relationship with the person I gave you. Nangong Lai was very smart. He immediately shook his head to protect himself. No. What you see is just the surface. In fact, we are not good at all. Not good at all. Why did you give her flowers? The young man's voice sounded a little careless. But Nangong Lai noticed that his left hand was clenched. He immediately started to clear his name. I did that to thank her. She was the one who taught me to give the flowers. I was going to give them to someone else. Give them to Qingzhan? The young man looked back with a faint voice. The long-time stuffiness in his chest finally faded a little. Nangong Lai looked as if he had seen a ghost. How did you know? The young man smiled and was extremely evil. 7 years, she is my only brother. Of course, I have to care more. Nangong Lai was speechless. Damn it, I don't need your care at all. Don't tell me that you were the one who played tricks on little Qingzhan. Nangong Lai thought of this and his handsome face was crying. What do you want to do? Tell me straight. Nothing. The young man continued to give him hints. I saw that you were too leisurely these past 2 days, going out of the palace to pick flowers and so on. I thought that you would like to have a little excitement in your life. An Ing stood outside the door and silently raised his head. No one would like such a scene, right? Nangong Lai, on the other hand, didn't wallow in self-pity. He connected the dots and suddenly laughed evilly. He reached out and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Aju, you should have said so earlier. If I had known that you were moved by the mundane world, I would have helped you earlier. The young man glanced sideways, his gaze indifferently sweeping over his hand. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb, and he immediately withdrew his hand. The young man brushed his clothes and said in a clear voice, "Don't think too much. I just don't like that woman." Speaking of which, what's going on between you and that woman? Nangong Lai's eyes flashed with playfulness. No matter how I ask her, she won't tell me. The young man raised his head and glanced at him. His tone was neither fast nor slow. She stole something from this king. For this thing, this king has been looking for her for 8 years. Nangong Lai frowned. Steal? That woman didn't look like one. Instead, there was one thing that bothered him. That woman's appearance was too similar to the young lady of the Hellion family. Things shouldn't be that simple. Nangong Lai's eyes lit up. He said casually, "Since she's a thief, then cut off her hands and feet and throw her out of the palace. If that doesn't work, then kill her. Do whatever you want to vent your anger. You haven't done anything for so long, it's not like you. When I get back, I'll throw her out first. Then, you can decide what you want to do with her." The young man didn't say anything. Nangong Lai knew that he agreed. However, he didn't think that Aju would do anything to that woman. If he really hated her, there were too many ways to make a person disappear in the palace. Moreover, Aju's identity was there. He could take anyone's life with just a word. However, Aju didn't look like he was lying. After all, even the number of 8 years came out. Since there's a solution, shouldn't you deal with little Qingzhan's matter? Now that she saw me, she turned around and left. Nangong Lai was very upset. The young man was a little absent-minded. He asked Shadow to call Qingzhan over. In this kind of situation, Nangong Lai, who had the demeanor of a young master, of course wouldn't show up. He hid behind the screen and pricked up his ears to listen to the sounds outside. The young man's voice was still magnetic and graceful. He said slowly, "Qingzhan, I heard about what happened this afternoon. You seem to have some misunderstanding about Master Lai." "No." Qingzhan had a serious look on her little face. She was tender and childish. "Your Highness, I have seen how young Master Lai is normally. He would talk to pretty sisters whenever he sees them. These are no longer secrets in the palace. I know that you have a good relationship with young Master Lai, so you don't have the heart to speak ill of him. It is young Master Lai's blessing to have a friend like your Highness." Nangong Lai behind the screen felt like his knee was stabbed by a knife. His expression was very complicated. Shadow, who knew the cause and effect, tried his best to hold back the smile at the corner of his mouth. Only the young man was very calm. "Actually, he has his good points too. Your Highness, don't worry. With you around, I will serve Master Lai well." Qingzhan made a promise. Although she was young, she was very loyal. Nangong Lai, however, was not happy at all. After Qingzhan left, he looked at the young man dejectedly. The young man's voice was faint. "I have tried my best. Who knew that you have the hobby of talking to pretty sisters? Nangong Lai, I regret it now." "All right, Qingzhan will be by your side in the future. 3 years, isn't it enough for you to change her impression of you?" The young man rubbed his eyebrows and said tiredly, "Shouldn't you go and do your thing?" Nangong Lai was still silent in his own worries. When he returned to the Holy Worship Palace and saw Hellion Vivian, the first thing he asked was, "Did you take something from Aju back then?" "No." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and said in a lazy voice, "Why do you say so?" Nangong Lai leaned on the door frame and said with an evil look, "I just went to his place. He said that 8 years ago, you stole something from him. He has been looking for you for 8 years because of it. Now that he finally caught you, do you think he will let you go? Sai, good luck to you. I can only provide you with this little clue. Think about it carefully. Maybe you took something that you didn't care about, but it is very important to Aju. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and thought about it. In the end, she shook her head. Then there is no other way. You can go now. Chapter 620. Leave. Hellion Vivian sat on the chaise lounge and crossed her long legs. You want to chase me out? What about chasing Qingzhan? You don't want to do it anymore? Nangong Lai thought to himself, if you don't leave, I will never be able to chase Qingzhan. Did Beligaju say something to you? Hellion Vivian was very smart. Her eyes dimmed. He asked you to chase me out of the holy worship palace? Nangong Lai touched the bridge of his nose. You know, it's fun to fight with God, but to fight with him is to seek death. I can't hold on anymore, but I will help you secretly. But you still have to chase me out. Hellion Vivian rubbed the teacup in her hand and took a breath. Her chest was a little cold. It's snowing outside, do you know? Are you trying to freeze me to death? Nangong Lai felt guilty. His Majesty just rewarded me with a fox fur. I'll get it for you now. Give me 10,000 taels of silver notes. I need it when I'm out. Hellion Vivian requested with a smile, but her throat was a little dry. Nangong Lai glanced at her, which meant to say, you're evil. Hellion Vivian didn't think she was evil. She originally planned to tidy up her mood in the holy worship palace and get ready to make a comeback. Now, that person didn't even want her to stay in the holy worship palace. If she didn't get what she wanted, she would feel sorry for herself. The fur given by His Majesty was indeed warm, but Hellion Vivian still felt a little cold on her fingers. When she walked out of the holy worship palace, the palace maids and eunuchs surrounded her. They looked at her and then turned back to whisper. Well, there weren't many people who were chased out at this time. The winter in the capital was too cold, so cold that Hellion Vivian's brain seemed to stop working. Her thoughts were in a mess. Was she really going to walk out of the palace like this? If it were according to Hellion Vivian's temper in the past, she would definitely leave. But now, Hellion Vivian could only lower her head and kick away the gravel, muttering, Beligaju, has your humanity been eaten by a dog? Kicking me out of the palace in the middle of winter? Just you wait. Sooner or later, I will. Hellion Vivian couldn't say the word, I anymore. It wasn't because of anything else, but because at the corner, a tall and elegant figure was standing there. His fair fingers were holding an oil paper umbrella, and a pair of ink-like eyes fell on her body. She didn't know how long he had been there, however. She was certain that he had definitely heard everything she had just said. Hellion Vivian paused in her steps. Her long legs were indeed a little stiff. That figure walked towards her step by step. The fur draped over his shoulders, and the snow fluttered in the air. It was like an exquisite ink painting, indescribably elegant. Hellion Vivian thought that after he became an adult, he would inevitably have an imposing aura that others would not dare to look directly at. But now, this young man was a real assassin who would appeal to both young and old. His appearance and aura left others in the dust. Not long after, Beligaju stood a step away from Hellion Vivian's grandmother and looked at her with a heavy gaze. Shadow followed behind him. If it was inconvenient for his master to speak, he would basically be the one to say, according to the system, the palace maids who have been expelled from the holy worship temple will be managed by His Highness. Hellion Weiwei didn't say anything else after she hummed in agreement. She had always been like this. When she was cold, it was not easy to get close to her. Not only was it not easy to get close to her, she also gave people a sense of oppression. Shadow saw that his words didn't have any effect, so he looked in the direction of Beligaju. The young man's side profile still didn't show any expression, but the warmth at the corner of his mouth had faded a lot. Coupled with the fact that he was personally holding the oil paper umbrella, he looked a little lonely. Shadow could only brace himself and continue to say to Hellion Vivian, you stay in the palace first. We'll make other arrangements later. Hellion Vivian didn't have any objections and nodded in agreement. Shadow finally heaved a sigh of relief. Then come with us. Okay. Hellion Vivian was a little absent-minded. She was still thinking that perhaps the extra umbrella in the young man's hand was for her. After all, there was really no need for him and Shadow to take out an extra umbrella. She was about to reach out to take it when, She heard Bailey Jiaju's indifferent voice say, "My humanity has already been eaten by dogs. You don't need to use this umbrella." Before Hellion Vivian could say anything, the young man turned around and walked into the snow. His footsteps were still light and elegant, but his back was unapproachable. Hellion Vivian sighed deeply. Sure enough, he heard it. He was so vengeful since young. It was really hard to deal with him. Shadow didn't say anything else and quickly gestured for Hellion Vivian to follow him. The two of them walked, one in front of the other, without saying a word. When they arrived at the palace, Beligaju took off his fur cloak. There wasn't a trace of happiness or anger on his face. He sat down at the wooden table and started to deal with the official affairs that had piled up over the past 2 days. His voice was a little hoarse compared to before. "Go and pour some tea." Hellion Vivian was already a little sleepy when she came in, coupled with the fact that it was warm in the palace. The moment her body touched the blanket on the chaise lounge, her head started to fall off bit by bit. There were also shadow guards who were serving in the night. Just as they were about to open their mouths and wake Hellion Vivian up, the young man placed his slender finger on his lips and gently gestured for them to keep quiet. The shadow guards instantly retracted their martial chi and hid back into the darkness. Beligaju glanced sideways at the person beside him, who was falling off more and more. Before he could react, he squatted down silently on one knee and knelt on the expensive black carpet. His lean back was straight, and with his back facing the shadow guards, his shoulders naturally supported the weight of that head. As though she had found the most comfortable position, Hellion Vivian fell into Beligaju's arms. The young man paused for a moment and then reached out to hug her. He didn't move because if he moved, the other party would definitely wake up. The shadow guards were dumbfounded as they looked at each other in dismay. Their faces were filled with shock. Was this still the highness that they knew? Shadow held onto the heater and didn't go forward to disturb them. The shock in his heart was deeper than anyone else. Since young, he had always been by Master's side. He didn't know anything else. But in this world, there was probably only this woman who could make Master willingly give up his dignity, hide all his murderous aura, and maintain such a posture. Halfway through, the shadow guards wanted to speak, but were forced back by the young man's noble gaze. But 30 minutes had already passed. No matter how soft the carpet was, kneeling for so long would make one's knees hurt. Fortunately, the person who was dozing off finally opened her eyes. Looking at the young man who was hugging her, she was still a little dazed. "You're still so young? So handsome." Chapter 621. With that, Hellion Vivian leaned over and kissed Beligaju on the corner of his mouth. However, at that moment, the youth's eyes turned completely cold. There was no need to think. Who did she think he was? Compared to anger, he felt more like his heart was empty. Caught off guard, the youth pulled his hand back and looked down at her. His voice was very cold. "I didn't ask you to come back for you to be lazy. You really should learn how to be a palace maid." The moment his fingers touched the ground, Hellion Vivian woke up. Looking at his emotionless eyes, she frowned in confusion. In the middle of the night, she was busy pouring tea and grinding ink. Hellion Vivian wasn't afraid of doing these things, but it didn't feel good to be treated as a palace maid. Especially the next day, she had to arrange lunch to entertain a certain highness's confidant. Hellion Vivian felt that the whole world was full of malice. "This is spicy. I can't eat it." The girl in plain clothes looked at the boiled fish that Hellion Vivian served and shook her head awkwardly. She wasn't being pretentious, but she really couldn't eat spicy food. Hellion Vivian was very calm. Her palms seemed to be holding the wind. With the force of her slender white fingers, those plates flew into the air. Then, she gently patted the table. The plates fell back on the table in an instant. There was no trace of the vegetable soup spilling. The only change was the plate arrangement on the table. The girl in plain clothes saw this scene, and her big eyes were filled with shock. If such abundant martial chi participated in the competition, it would definitely be the best. Bailey Jiaju's calm eyes also changed. The fingers holding the bamboo chopsticks tightened again and again. For so many years, he deliberately ignored a problem. That was, how did she avoid the guards in the palace and disappear just like that? Now he knew. With that move just now, as long as she wanted to, none of the shadow guards outside the palace could stop her. Your Highness, Your Highness, the plain-clothed girl gently called out to the young man. She could clearly sense that he had changed. She couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Beligaju replied, "In?" Even his gaze was gentle. The bystanders were naturally envious. But only the plain-clothed girl knew that such gentleness would feel fake after a long time. Ever since she had known him, except when they were young, he would frighten others. After that, whenever he faced her again, he would always be as gentle as jade. He would never get angry or show any other emotions. Everyone said that he had given her all his patience. In reality, this kind of patience seemed to be deliberately created. Nothing. The young girl had forgotten what she wanted to say. In addition to the fear she had since she was young, she was especially careful when dealing with Beligaju. Nangonglai watched from the side, and the corners of his mouth curled up. "Aju, have you found your things?" "No." Beligaju wiped the corners of his mouth with a white handkerchief. There was no fluctuation in his voice. Nangonglai swept a glance at Hellion Vivian, who was standing, and his smile deepened. "Then you have to look for it carefully. Speaking of which, Aju, that day should be the first time you were intimate with a woman, right?" Hearing this, the expressions of the two people at that time didn't change. The young girl's reaction was the biggest. The tender pink color spread from her cheeks to her neck. Beligaju casually raised his eyes and met Nangonglai's smiling lips. He only said 2 words, "No." "Ah." Nangonglai originally thought that he had guessed correctly. Now that he heard Beligaju's words, his gaze suddenly changed. He swept a glance at the blushing young girl. "No way. You kissed?" Hearing this, Hellion Vivian's fingers under her long sleeves paused. She looked back at the two people. One was as indifferent as jade, the other was extremely shy. They were a good match. She laughed softly and didn't say anything. She was just confused. Based on her understanding of Beligaju, even if that person wanted to leave a memento, he wouldn't really do anything. If there was any action, it meant that there was sincerity mixed in. Hellion Vivian frowned and felt a little pain in her temples. She had never thought about this situation, but no matter what, even if that person had given up everything for her, she wouldn't tolerate sand in her love. But even so, she still had to take him back. This had nothing to do with whether she liked him or not. It was that she had to complete this matter. Hellion Vivian moved her wrist. Her eyes were a little blank, so she didn't see the young girl's slight shake of her head. Nangonglai's interest was piqued. He lowered his voice in Beligaju's ear and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Since it wasn't with her, then who did you kiss?" Beligaju didn't answer him. His expression was indifferent as he ate his meal. Nangonglai was very curious. Who exactly was it with? "If you say another word, I'll leave." The young man's voice was very cold. Nangonglai keenly sensed that he wasn't very happy today, so he looked at Hellion Vivian again. During this period of time, Aju's unhappiness was mostly related to this woman. Hellion Vivian was rubbing her head. Her head was so painful that she couldn't hear what the other party was saying. This was very abnormal. Since yesterday, her physical strength seemed to be a little unable to keep up. Why was this? Logically speaking, there were still more than 20 days left. There was plenty of time. Why did she have such a big feeling? Could it be that there was a problem with the place she was guarding? Hellion Vivian's mind was spinning fast, but her face didn't show it. Only her eyes were getting darker and darker. Nangonglai was still admiring how she could be so calm when he saw the young man sitting next to him, looking at that woman with a gaze that he had never seen before. It was an indescribable feeling. However, that kind of feeling made Nangonglai feel as if it was a little out of his control. This wasn't necessarily a good thing for Aju. During the meal, everyone had their own thoughts. Even the tea and snacks were absent-minded. Coincidentally, the emperor had something to do, so he called Beligaju over. Lunch finally came to an end. When there was no one around, Hellion Vivian tried to talk to the red string on her wrist. She wanted to summon the fire Qilin from her consciousness. But in the end, all he got was silence. Maybe she was using the wrong method. Or maybe she could only talk to the fire Qilin when it first communicated with her. A series of guesses made Hellion Vivian's head hurt even more. Her body also felt a little tired. In order to better recover her condition, Helian Wei Wei simply found a corner in the sleeping chamber and closed her eyes. Chapter 622. Her face was a little hot. Helian Vivian did not expect to get such an answer. Only one person in the world would say such a thing with a cold expression. Why? Didn't you feel it? The young man's fingers touched her waist. The corners of his mouth curved up. It was a little cold, but it was more seductive. That's right. It's because you are so unguarded that you would sit on me in such a position. If Beligaju did not say it, Helian Vivian would not have noticed how ambiguous her actions were. Her waist was held by him, as if she was doing something to him. Wait a minute, she had only done that to calm him down. Why did everything change after he said that? What else do you want to hear? The young man held her hand tightly. His thin lips brushed past her ear. The heat was on her softest part. Helian Vivian's heart was beating like it was going to explode. I don't want to hear anything. She just wanted to lift the blanket and hide herself in it. She had no experience at all. Really? Really? Then let me ask, why do you care? Beligaju reached out and pinched her chin. His handsome face approaching. Don't be ambiguous. Helian Vivian paused and said, Of course I care. You should know that if you are not completely mine, then I would rather not have you. Then what if I let you stay? The young man's eyes were brighter than ever, as if he was holding his breath, waiting for an answer. Helian Vivian looked at him and shook her head stiffly. The young man smiled. All the warmth was burned away in an instant. He thought that because she cared about his kiss, it meant that she liked him. But in reality, he was wrong. She cared because he was a fragment of that person from the very beginning. Only that person was the existence at the top of her heart. For that person, she could risk her life and look for soul fragments everywhere. For that person, she could give up everything at her fingertips. It was not like he could not give her wealth, but she did not even look at it. He used to think that she only liked mature, good-tempered, and gentle men. That was why he tried his best to be less venomous. However, his efforts were of no use. He saw that she still wanted to mock him, but now, he understood that no matter what he became, she wouldn't care. Because she only thought of that person in her heart. How infatuated. This kind of infatuation would probably move anyone who saw it. However, Beligaju's chest felt like it was filled with heavy lead water. It was so heavy that it made it hard for him to breathe. Back then, she didn't even give him a word before leaving. He thought that she was a heartless woman, but in fact, she was not heartless. She had given her heart to another person. He had never tasted anything like this before. Unable to obtain what he wished for, he was in an extremely sorry state, yet he desperately wanted to see himself in the other party's eyes. Even if I go back and hate you, you still want me to go back with you? Beligaju's voice was very cold as the air in a winter's night. In addition, his hand moved to her neck, which made Helian Vivian feel cold all over in an instant. The word ruthless was like a bayonet, choking her throat. Even when she spoke, it was painful. Even if you hate me, you have to go back with me. If you don't go back, you will disappear forever. Do you know why the fire Qilin is not by my side? That's because even if I don't go back, I won't disappear. I have enough of an independent personality. It's only a matter of time. Sooner or later, I will grow up to be what you want. Beligaju's fingers tightened. In that case, you also want to go, right? Helian Vivian suddenly felt a pain in her head. She heard the fire Qilin's weak voice from the other side. There's a problem here. How are you? Did you encounter a problem? Why did I hear His Highness say that he has an independent personality and wants you to stay? Let's not talk about my problem first. What's going on over there? Helian Vivian was anxious. Your voice doesn't sound right. The fire Qilin endured the pain. People have been dying in the palace. The resentment has spread throughout the entire capital. Ordinary people can't feel it, but as a divine beast, it is very affected, especially the azure dragon without the mysterious ice iron chain. It has begun to show signs of going berserk. Someone behind this must be planning something. They want to subdue the azure dragon while His Highness is not here, then take the opportunity to destroy His Highness's body. Qilin. Helian Wei clenched her fists. Burn the red string on my hand. She had to go back and stop all of this. If Beligaju's body disappeared, then all of this would be meaningless. The fire Qilin sighed. I know. If the other party said so, then the chance of the fragment returning would be very small. Who are you talking to? Bailey Jiaju was extremely intelligent. In addition, at his current age, he had already begun to awaken in certain aspects, especially since the fire Qilin was still his mythical beast. The other party's absent-mindedness made the young man narrow his eyes. Is it through the red string in your hand? Helian Vivian was shocked. She didn't expect him to notice these things. Since just now, your eyes have been on your left hand. Beligaju's eyes emitted a cold light. You're planning to leave me again, right? Helian Vivian paused for a moment, then met his eyes. She had never been so sure before. I'm not going to leave you. I just want to take you back. Beligaju, you have to know. No matter if it's the past or the future, to me, it's still you. You can't deny your own future. The youth sneered, as if he had thought it through, and suddenly let go of his hand. In the end, he was just a fragment, and he couldn't stop her from leaving. From the beginning, he couldn't do anything to stop it. You can go. There was not the slightest ripple in Bailey Jiaju's voice. It was almost to the point of calmness. His pair of eyes were originally the most beautiful, but at this moment, they were empty and shallow, like a lens without focus, leaving only empty blankness and empty ruthlessness. I hope that in the future, you can bear my hatred. Helian Vivian wanted to say something, but found that her throat couldn't make any sound. She watched as the youth in front of her became more and more blurred. Her mind turned black, followed by the familiar feeling of dizziness. She couldn't distinguish between north, south, east, and west at all. When she woke up again, she had already returned to the original place. Chapter 623. The Green Dragon Lake was covered with thick fog. Fire Kylan looked at her and stamped 2 steps forward with its red claws. Miss Helian Wei. Helian Vivian ignored it. The first thing she said when she looked up was, "Where is he?" His body is still there. The soul-returning lamp is not out, but Fire Kylan looked at the lamp beside it. Master is back. Helian Vivian clenched her hands and murmured with her head down. Not back? How is that possible? He said that he would come back, even if it was at the cost of hating her. Fire Kylan looked a little depressed and said in a low voice, there is still time before the 49th day. Since the soul-returning lamp is not out, it means that Master is thinking about it, but he will definitely come back. Helian Vivian interrupted it, and her eyes were shining. He hates me so much. How can he not come back? That man is a vengeful person. He will not be satisfied if he doesn't come back and kill me with his own hands. Fire Kylan was stunned. So you asked me to burn the red rope? Just to make him hate you and have to come back? To be honest, Fire Kylan had lived for so many years and had seen a lot of infatuated men and women. There were many who risked their lives for their master. However, for the sake of His Highness's life, Wei Wei was truly the only one who was willing to give up everything. But what if His Highness really hates you after he comes back? Fire Kylan couldn't help but ask. Helian Vivian's eyes were gloomy at first, then she smiled brightly, then let him fall in love with me again. Besides, there is no hate without love. Fire Kylan wanted to say that if things in the world could be predicted so well, there wouldn't be so many regrets. What I am afraid of is that he really only hates you and doesn't love you. Helian Vivian was smart enough to know this. If there was enough time, she might be able to explain things slowly, but the situation didn't allow it. She had to take a gamble. Bang! There was almost no time for Helian Vivian to think. There was an unusual sound from the bottom of the lake. The earth shook twice. Helian Wei regained control of her body and looked at the fire Qilin. What happened? It's the Azure Dragon. Fire Qilin was also anxious. It has been like this for the past few days. Someone wants to subdue it and has already set up a formation. The resentment is too strong, so it can only rely on hitting to maintain its rationality. Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes and didn't say anything. She pressed her fingers against the ground and jumped into the lake. By my command, by my name, Yuan Ming, come out. Hellion Vivian stood in the middle of the lake, her long robes fluttering in the wind and her black hair dancing in the wind. An invisible air current surrounded her like a natural barrier. It emitted a faint light and separated all the water, leaving only that piece of heaven and earth. His silver hair was like the moonlight sprinkling down, setting off that outstanding handsome face. Standing behind Hellion Vivian, his pair of long and narrow eyes carried a dense evil charm. Resentment spread out from his surroundings. Unexpectedly, evil spirits couldn't get close to him. Hellion Vivian didn't know why, but she felt that Yuan Ming seemed to be different this time. But she couldn't tell what the difference was. Yuan Ming laughed first, with a strong evil spirit. Why did you call me out? To swallow all the resentment of the Azure Dragon Lake. Hellion Vivian didn't understand formations. If she wanted to play, she wanted to play big. It was okay to be rough. Anyway, she was that ruthless. Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows and looked at her. I need someone to split the lake bottom to remove the resentment. I know. Hellion Vivian moved one hand. I will split the lake bottom. You only need to do what you should do. Yuan Ming laughed again, with a hint of playfulness in his voice. Good. As soon as he finished speaking, Hellion Vivian bit her finger. She raised her right hand with great strength. Her eyes burst out with coldness, which was almost bone-chilling. By my command, the wind and clouds of the world, rise. The invisible gas gathered in the center of her palm. A huge whirlpool stirred up the entire Azure Dragon Lake. Hellion Vivian stood in the center of the whirlpool without dodging. Her eyes were like torches. Her robe fluttered, and several rays of light burst out from her back, forming a golden lotus. The Azure Dragon surged on the surface of the lake. A huge golden lotus rose from the bottom of the lake and slowly pressed down from the lake. In the process of pressing down, the lake water automatically separated. The gas was condensed like clouds. The evil spirit that filled the air melted like snow and turned into nothingness. The aura became stronger and stronger, and the entire Azure Dragon Lake couldn't help but shake. The Azure Dragon jumped out, stirring up huge waves in the air. The turbidity in its eyes was finally washed away by the light of Buddha. It sank to the bottom of the lake again. A pair of dragon eyes quietly looked at Hellion Vivian in the lake, like a newborn baby who had forgotten everything. Hellion Vivian reached out and put her hand on the dragon's head with a faint smile. Then, she touched it with her face. Be good. We'll wait for him to come back together. The Azure Dragon that had been infected by resentment had lost its consciousness. Even if it was bathed in the light of Buddha, it couldn't return to its original strength unless its master reappeared. However, at this moment, the Azure Dragon actually understood Hellion Vivian's words. Its dragon whiskers moved, and it nodded. Not for other reasons. Just because she said so. Let's wait for him to come back together. In the vast martial chi, the man in white in the array spat out a mouthful of blood. The eerie little person immediately supported him and exclaimed, Master, it's the demon-slaying Buddhist incantation. Someone chanted the demon-slaying Buddhist incantation. How is this possible? No one in the world knows this kind of Buddhist incantation. It's not mature enough. The real demon-slaying Buddhist incantation shouldn't be like this. Jing Wushuang wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. Her face was pale. Although he said so, he was also afraid in his heart. The demon-slaying Buddhist incantation. It was an incantation that no one in the demon-slaying tribe could understand. Even an iPhone, who was extremely talented back then, only knew the method, but she couldn't learn it. But now, the demon-slaying Buddhist incantation had returned to the human world. Who was it? It was obvious that she had a deep affinity with Buddhism, but she just had to make a contract with the devil? Could it be that Hellion Vivian had returned? Jing Wushuang faintly had an answer in his heart. His usually gentle and handsome face lost focus for a moment. However, he quickly recovered and ordered in a calm voice, Since we can't take away their physical bodies, we'll start with the Imperial Palace. Start the plan to shatter the seal, and let the Emperor set up the array now.
Yes.
The little person was a resentful baby. There were many people who had miscarried in the imperial palace, so it could be said that it was like a fish in water there. It could do anything with ease. Moreover, no one knew that the current emperor was already different from the previous emperor. Chapter 624. Ever since he started eating pills, ever since he obtained power, he still didn't know how to be satisfied. Ever since he wanted to live forever, he had fallen into this trap. The blood of a young girl was the best at prolonging one's life, but it could also make one addicted to the path of evil. There was blood in every pill the emperor took. As long as the master gave the order, that person would be nothing more than a tool in their hands. The night grew darker. In the inner courtyard of the palace, the shadows of the trees swayed. The emperor, dressed in bright yellow, sat in a dark corner. His expression could not be seen, but the blood at the corner of his mouth made him look gloomy. Eunuch Gao did not dare to raise his head to look through the barrier. He lowered his head in fear, and even his fingers were trembling. The emperor glanced at him, and his voice turned cold. "Did you see it?" Eunuch Gao froze and trembled all over. He said loudly, "This servant did not see anything." The emperor looked at him gloomily. "I like smart people the most. Since you did not see anything, then find me a few younger palace maids." But the recent situation in the palace, His Majesty is also aware of the situation in the palace. Eunuch Gao stammered. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. If this continues, the Ministry of Appointments might find out everything. When that happens, it won't be good. Hearing this, the emperor suddenly became irritated. It's only a few palace maids who died, and those people from the Ministry of Appointments are not willing to let this matter go. They want to investigate. He was more afraid than anyone else that someone would know the details of this matter. The members of the imperial family were not allowed to cultivate the devil. This was a rule passed down by the ancestors. Although the retired emperor was not in the palace, his old subordinates still held some military power. He could not act rashly. If people found out that he drank human blood in order to achieve immortality, everything he had now would be taken away. He could not lose the throne, and he could not lose the power in his hands. He wanted immortality so much because he wanted to sit on this dragon throne forever. Even if he killed the retired emperor's trusted aides, the people would not allow a person who drank human blood to continue to be the emperor. Therefore, this secret was not known to anyone. He was so close. As long as he drank 3 more young and pure palace maids, he could complete the formation and achieve immortality. He had to think of a way to make those people from the Ministry of Appointments shut up. The emperor lowered his eyes and was deep in thought. Right at this moment, there was a sudden noise coming from the side of the barrier. The emperor's eyes immediately darkened as he looked in that direction. "Who is it?" The little one looked at the candlestick beneath his feet. His tiger-like eyes darkened. His body, which was about to run away, also paused. A chill ran down his spine. He only paused for a moment, then immediately ran out. He was still holding the fruit that he had just taken from outside. He took a bite and said in a dignified manner, "Imperial Father, it's me. I was hungry and couldn't find anything to eat, so I came to find Imperial Father." The emperor lowered his eyes and looked at the little one not far from him. His eyes darkened as if he was confirming something. Come to Father." The little one's left hand, which was hidden under his long sleeve, clenched tightly, but his face was still as dignified as ever. Third brother had said it before. No matter what the situation was, just don't let the other party see your true emotions. That meant that there was a chance of victory in everything. At the thought of this, the little one held the dessert in his hand and walked toward the emperor as usual. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. That's enough. You don't have to come over. The emperor raised his lower lip and was very gentle. You can see clearly if you stand there. Didn't you hear anything when you were standing outside just now? The little one knew that the emperor was testing him. Third brother had also said that the emperor had to be 30% fake and 70% real before anyone would believe him. Just by saying that 70% was real, it was enough to dispel people's doubts. I heard it. The little 7th prince held the dessert in his mouth and puffed up his cheeks. His tone was very cool. I'm not deaf. Of course I can hear. Has Imperial Father been talking to Eunuch Gao all this time? What were you talking about? Was it about what to eat for breakfast tomorrow? Eunuch Gao heard this and heaved a deep sigh of relief. He was really afraid that the little seventh prince would hear something at this critical juncture and say it out loud again. With His Majesty's current thoughts, if the little seventh prince really heard everything, he might not be able to keep his life. Fortunately, Eunuch Gao suppressed his shock. On the other side, the emperor also laughed. Do you think that everyone is like you who only knows how to eat? If you're hungry, go to the imperial kitchen and ask them to prepare something good for you. I'm tired too. You can go and rest. Yes. Can I take away the desserts outside? The little one acted as gluttonous as usual. The more he acted like this, the happier the emperor was. Of course you can. As long as he didn't hear anything, it was easy to talk about. Thank you, Imperial Father. The little one walked out in a dignified manner. When he stretched out his little paw, it was a little itchy. He reached out and scratched it. The emperor watched his movements with heavy eyes, and his gaze fell on the back of his hand. The little seventh prince had been practicing martial arts since he was young. Of course, he knew that the emperor was staring at him. It was like a snake staring at its prey. As long as the prey showed a little weakness, the snake would swallow it in one bite. The little one stood against the light. Her tiger-like eyes narrowed. Then, she grabbed all the pastries on the table and held them in her arms. She walked out of the bedroom unhurriedly and leisurely. Seeing that the little one had left, the emperor's face darkened. Send more people outside. No matter who it is in the future, no one is allowed to enter my bedroom as they please.
Yes.
Eunuch Gao trembled again. As expected, the emperor had the intention to kill just now. The emperor seemed to be thinking about something else. He asked, "Did you see the little one's hand just now?" "I saw it." Eunuch Gao replied respectfully, "The seventh prince is still the same as when he was born. Once there is too much resentment around him and it's cloudy, something will rise from his body. Other than the time when he was 1 year old, I haven't seen him reach out and scratch for many years. However, Your Majesty, don't worry. I believe that the seventh prince will recover in a few days." After hearing this, the emperor slowly narrowed his eyes. Scarlet began to spread from the corners of his eyes. "Then tell me, did he hear what I said?" The emperor's tone was very slow. Every word was filled with eerie coldness. Eunuch Gao's heart shrank again. I don't think so. Don't think so?" The emperor turned his head and looked at himself in the bronze mirror. The bridge of his nose and the bloodstains on his lips. In an instant, the emperor's eyes narrowed. His voice was extremely eerie. "No, he heard everything. He's just pretending that he didn't." Chapter 625. I've really underestimated him. How could a child who grew up with third prince only know how to eat? The emperor reached out and wiped the blood on his lips. His eyes were gloomy. "Pass down the order. Say that the murderer who killed the palace maids has been found." Eunuch Gao suddenly paused. "The murderer who killed the palace maids?" "That's right." The emperor curled his lips. "The seventh prince's demonic nature has been revealed. He killed them to suppress his terrifying appetite. After I found out, he fled in panic. Write an imperial edict now and announce it to the world. Ask the Ministry of Personnel to investigate immediately. His matter could not be discovered by anyone, even if that person was his son. Moreover, this was an opportunity for him. As long as the Ministry of Personnel transferred all the suspicion to another person, he would be able to extricate himself from the whirlpool. As a son, it was only right for him to take the blame for his father. He would treat it as a return to his father for doting on him all these years. Once the imperial edict was sent out, no one would believe Little Seven even if he wanted to say anything. How could Eunuch Gao not understand the logic behind this? However, he had no other choice. The retired emperor and the royal family were not present. The person who made the decisions in the palace was the emperor after all. If he did not do as he was told, only death would await him. That night, the imperial edict was sent out. The entire patrol camp of the imperial army entered the palace. They were the emperor's personal guards. Usually, when they were dispatched, It meant that something big was going to happen. The palace maids and eunuchs were whispering in panic. What's going on now? Don't you know? I heard that they're trying to catch the seventh prince. The people from the palace of heavenly purity leaked that the seventh prince was the one who killed the palace maids. That's impossible, someone exclaimed. The seventh prince is such a cute child. How could he kill so many palace maids at such a young age? I'm not too sure about this, but it seems to be related to him becoming a demon. Don't you think that the seventh prince's appetite is much bigger than others? How could a child eat so much? However, the seventh prince has never felt full. Last time, he ran around with a goldfish in his mouth at Eunuch Sun's place and was nagged for a long time by Eunuch Sunday. Tell me, which child would eat raw fish? Let's be more careful in the future. We haven't found the seventh prince yet. If he sets his eyes on us, we might even be sucked dry by him. Don't say any more. It's so scary. In the deep courtyard of the imperial palace, the noise gradually faded away. But it couldn't stop the situation from changing. Now, the palace maids went out in groups. Even when they went to the toilet, they had to call someone with them, for fear of encountering an accident. The seventh prince's martial chi had always been amazing, so it was not that easy to capture him. The patrol camp sent thousands of people to conduct a carpet search of the imperial palace. East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate. Each gate was personally guarded by a revered teacher sent by the elder courtyard. Whether the seventh prince could be caught or not was another matter. But one thing was for sure, he should still be in the palace. Patter. Dong Song couldn't bear the weight of the snow. He lowered his head, and the snow fell on the little one's body. The little one curled up into a ball. His clothes were already soaked. The numbness and itchiness coming from his body, mixed with a sharp pain, made him want to scratch his body. However, the pain and itchiness didn't ease at all. Soon, a few scratches appeared on the back of his hand. The little one looked at the scratches on the back of his hand and frowned in pain. Then, he leaned against the tree trunk. He originally wanted to look for his third brother. Halfway through, he realized that his third brother and third sister-in-law hadn't been around recently. Moreover, his third brother's place was definitely the most dangerous. On the contrary, if he hid in the palace of heavenly purity, he wouldn't be caught immediately. The little one dragged her tired body and moved her feet. She felt that every part of her body was burning hot, and she could not exert any strength in her limbs. He rubbed his stomach and took out a piece of pastry from his outer robe. He put it in his mouth and chewed twice with his head held high. He heard what the palace maid said. His imperial father was most likely going to push him out to be the scapegoat. After all, little Seven was different from Beligaju. When he realized this, his tiger eyes dimmed. He pouted and looked like he was about to cry. However, very soon, he sniffed. His third brother said that a man shouldn't cry. He was such a manly man. He definitely couldn't ruin his image. However, he was still afraid. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the thing on his hand. The little one rubbed against it with all his might. It was inevitable that he felt a little wronged. He only liked to eat a little. He was so handsome. How did he look like a monster? The little one looked up and thought. He took another bite of the cold pastry in his hand and growled like a tiger cub. Third brother, where did you go? If he didn't come back, he would really be caught. He didn't want to go to the dungeon. The food there wasn't delicious at all. The little one gritted his teeth. He knew that it was useless to keep hiding here. He tried to circulate his chi a second time, but found that his limbs were still weak. Outside the west gate of the imperial palace was the sacrificial hall. Perhaps he could find Pervert lie there. However, there were many of his imperial father's people in the sacrificial hall. He had to be careful. The little one had never been like this before. Even when he walked, he was wobbling like a trapped beast that had lost its claws. Still haven't caught him. In the dark, the emperor's expression turned cold. Have you searched the third prince's chamber? The imperial guard with an iron mask cupped his hands and bowed. Your Majesty, we've searched everywhere. We still haven't found the seventh prince. What about the ministers in the Ministry of Civil Affairs? Did they receive news that the seventh prince knew a big secret and wanted to tell one of them? The emperor asked again. The imperial guard commander shook his head. No, But many of them don't believe that the seventh prince is the murderer of the palace maids. After all, it's ridiculous that he became a monster. Ridiculous? If they saw the seventh prince with their own eyes, they wouldn't say that. But this kid is really good at keeping his cool. He didn't make a move for so long. The emperor rubbed the bloodstains on his fingertips. A normal child's first reaction after finding out about this was to ask for help. He had arranged so many people in the Ministry of Civil Affairs just to catch him. In the end, the emperor clenched his fists. The Imperial Guard commander suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Oh right, Your Majesty, we haven't searched the Palace of Heavenly Purity." Hearing this, the emperor's fingers paused. His eyes flashed with excitement. "Seal the Palace of Heavenly Purity immediately and inform all ministers in the Ministry of Civil Affairs to put on their court robes and enter the palace. I want them to see for themselves whether the seventh prince is a human or a monster." Chapter 626. As soon as Helene Vivian entered the palace, she noticed that something was amiss. The Elder Council had sent out too many young masters, and they hadn't left at all. It was as if they were searching for someone. "It seems that something has happened in the palace." Yuan Ming's sinister voice sounded from behind her. Such a strong aura of resentment. Did someone enter the path of evil? Helene Vivian turned to the side and listened. Without hesitation, she grabbed a palace maid and asked, "What's going on?" "Third Princess Consort." The palace maid was startled at first, but then she immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. "This servant greets the third Princess Consort." Helene Vivian reached out and pulled her back. "You don't need to kneel. Tell me first, what's going on? Why are there so many young masters here? Why you still don't know?" The palace maid looked at her in surprise. Then she stammered, "The little seventh prince seems to be a demon. The emperor has already issued a decree to capture him." "Monster?" Helene Wei furrowed her brows tightly. "Who said that?" The palace maid was startled by her tone. "This servant isn't too sure. I think the news came from the Palace of Heavenly Purity. It said that people have been dying in the palace recently, and all their blood has been sucked dry by the little seventh prince." Palace of Heavenly Purity? Helene Vivian's eyes darkened. Wasn't that where the old emperor lived? Moreover, she remembered that Yuan Ming had said that something wasn't quite right there. "Found him? We found the seventh prince." Suddenly, a commotion came from afar. Helene Vivian's heart sank. Without thinking, she immediately followed the young masters. In the courtyard of the Palace of Heavenly Purity, hundreds of imperial guards surrounded a small firewood shed. The emperor and several officials from the Ministry of Appointments were standing outside. "Kick the door open," the emperor ordered in a deep voice. The officials from the Ministry of Appointments looked at each other. Finally, they couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, could this be a misunderstanding? The seventh prince is still so young. How could he kill people?" The emperor didn't say anything. The elder standing next to him sneered and said, "Lord Zhang, I think you've gone senile. The Seventh Highness is a monster. He will definitely kill people. What does age have to do with this?" As he spoke, he looked at the emperor and clenched his fists. "Your Majesty, I think we should use fire to smoke them out so that the ministers can see clearly." The ministers of the Ministry of Appointments were not prepared, and they were not as eloquent as the elders. In addition, the emperor's attitude was too obvious. There was nothing they could do. Could it be that he had to watch as the seventh prince was burned out by the fire? According to His Highness's character, if he knew about this in the future, none of them would be spared. But now, they really had no other choice. "Someone come." "Fire." The elder raised his voice, his eyes flashing with fire. "Listen up. Capture this monster alive." Yes, the young masters had just gotten into formation and were about to start the fire. Suddenly, a clear voice sounded, carrying a strong sense of oppression. "Who did you say is the monster?" The atmosphere instantly dropped to the freezing point. The aura of death felt like there was an invisible hand squeezing everyone's hearts. With a gentle twist, blood would splatter everywhere, and life would instantly turn into ashes. Then, Several bolts of lightning flashed across the sky, causing everyone's pupils to shrink. At that moment, everyone clearly saw a cold and incomparably beautiful face being clearly engraved by the light. It was Hellion Vivian. She walked over coldly like a ghost, and at the same time, her hand moved. Snow and dust rolled up from the ground like a whirlwind, instantly suppressing the flames. The elder stood in the whirlwind. His face hurt from the wind. He reached out to block it and narrowed his eyes. Hellion Vivian, it's you again. Do you know what you're doing? Hellion Wei slowly walked forward, her sleeves fluttering in the wind, as if she was an emissary from hell. Her pair of ice-cold eyes looked at that elder. I also want to ask you, elder, do you know what you're doing right now? Shao Qi has the blood of the imperial family flowing in his body. You're going against your superiors and burning him. What are you thinking? The elder was choked by her words and was momentarily speechless. The little eunuch beside the emperor saw his master nod and loudly shouted, "Third Princess Consort, everyone knows that you want to protect His Highness the Seventh Prince, but you can't protect him like this. Now that His Highness the Seventh Prince has become a monster and killed so many people in the palace, you actually ask the elder what he's thinking? You clearly want to protect the murderer. Are you speaking on behalf of yourself or His Majesty?" Hellion Wei leisurely cast her gaze over. The emperor frowned. The little eunuch was a shrewd person, so of course he wouldn't expose his master. He only loudly said, "I'm speaking on behalf of all the dead palace maids." Kacha, a few sounds of wood breaking suddenly sounded in the air. There was still a raging fire above the head as it rolled to the side of the little eunuch's feet. The little eunuch jumped in fright. When he raised his head, he saw Wei looking at him. At this moment, her ink-black eyes were like the deep and serene ocean. Yet her voice was calm. "Say that again." The little eunuch froze and then shouted with a sharp voice, "You won't let people speak the truth? His Highness the Seventh Prince is a monster." However, before he could finish his sentence, his body fell to the ground with a thud. Hellion Vivian's foot stepped on his wrist. The wind that was blowing on her body suddenly became hot, as if it was burning holes in his body. What was even more terrifying was that he didn't know why he couldn't even make a sound. He could only silently twitch with his mouth open, as if the god of death had grabbed his throat. "Who told you that those palace maids were killed by Shao Qi?" Hellion Vivian's voice was cold. "A eunuch dares to slander a prince like this? He deserves to die." The emperor didn't think that Hellion Vivian would be so bold as to make a move in front of him. His face couldn't maintain its calm, and his voice seemed to be forced out from his lips. Hellion Vivian didn't give him a chance to speak. She immediately interrupted him with a salute. With a face full of loyalty, she said, "Your Majesty, your servant has helped you get rid of the traitor who wronged the Seventh Prince. Your Majesty, please don't blame your servant." The muscles on the emperor's face twitched in anger, but he couldn't do anything to Hellion Vivian. Because if he did, it would be too obvious. It would be hard to avoid suspicion. So, he could only expressionlessly say, "Get up." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Hellion Vivian straightened her back. The elder sneered, "No matter how good some people are at talking, this matter must be investigated clearly. As for whether the Seventh Prince is a monster or not, we can only decide after seeing him. Men, go knock on the door again. If no one answers, light a fire." However, at this time, Chapter 627. A creak was heard. The tightly shut wooden door of the firewood shed opened. Snow and dust rose into the air. The wind was so strong that it was difficult to open one's eyes. Amidst the swirling snow, a small gray figure could be seen walking out slowly. The little one still had his head down, so no one could see his expression clearly. He just kept walking with his head down. When the imperial guards closest to the firewood shed saw him, an indescribable fear suddenly appeared on their faces. Their eyes slowly widened, and all of them took a step back. Seeing this, the elder immediately scolded them. "What are you doing? Hurry up and catch him first." The imperial guards looked at the emperor and the rest in fear. They couldn't move at all, let alone speak. It was as if there was an unknown force choking their throats. From the moment the seventh prince appeared, they knew that something was wrong. The little one continued to walk forward. An unknown airflow was stirring up in his body. His whole body was itchy and painful. It was as if there was a swarm of little insects in his blood, clamoring to break out of their shells. The back of his hand was itching badly, and his forehead was burning hot. He couldn't stay in the woodshed any longer. He just wanted to eat, but he didn't want to admit that he was a monster. He imitated Third Brother and coldly looked at the imperial guards. His eyes were cold. Scram. If they didn't scram, he would trample them flat. However, just as he took a step, a pentagram shape appeared under his feet. It floated in 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. It fell from the sky like a net and covered the seventh prince's head, emitting a faint glow. It was copper wire, a formation that was set up early on. The elder laughed and said proudly, "Seventh prince, this is the most secure formation in the world. It can force all demons and ghosts to reveal their true forms until they are subdued. I advise you not to resist, otherwise, you will be the one who gets hurt." The little one frowned, stretched out his arms, and moved them left and right. The net-like copper wires immediately tightened around the little one. Wounds appeared on the back of the little one's fair hands. Blood flowed from his fingertips and dripped onto the ground. This time, the little one didn't even move. Big tiger eyes stared at his feet. When the light came into contact with his skin, it was as if he was being burned. His eyes gradually lost their original luster, and he looked like a withered little tiger. However, there was something that made people feel uneasy. Hellion Vivian clenched her hands in heartache. "Yuan Ming, break the formation." "Now?" Yuan Ming raises his eyebrows and says in an evil tone, "Breaking the array in front of so many people is tantamount to shedding all pretense of cordiality. The emperor will definitely say that you are rebelling and arrest you and that little brat together." "Are you sure?" Hellion Vivian sneered. "I am sure. There is no reason for me to hold back and care about face when others bully our little seven. If I want a rebel, then so be it." After saying that, she didn't waste time. She pointed her finger, and the wind and clouds surged. The sound of a silver knife cutting through the wind was heard as it shot towards the Yin-Yang masters who were controlling the formation. The Yin-Yang masters were thrown into chaos, and their formation changed. A trace of anger flashed in the elder's eyes. He roared, "Imperial guards, arrest this rebellious girl who dares to use a knife in front of the emperor." The imperial guards looked at the emperor who was standing in the distance. When they saw that he didn't object, they immediately raised the bows in their hands. All the arrows were aimed at Hellion Vivian, who was standing in front of the little one. Hellion Wei Wei's figure moved as she propped up a black folding umbrella between her fingers. Large snowflakes fell down and hit the surface of the umbrella. The handle of the umbrella flew and blocked the arrows that were shot over one by one. Hellion Vivian, the emperor, who had been silent all this time, suddenly raised his voice and looked at her gloomily. "Are you trying to rebel?" Facing such an accusation, Hellion Vivian stood straight and smiled with delicate features. With a calm and languid voice, she said slowly, "Wei Wei doesn't dare. But isn't your majesty a little too impatient this time? Little Seven is your son, and there is no evidence to prove that Little Seven was the one who killed those palace maids. You are forcing him like this. Are you really trying to find out who the murderer is?" "I don't think so." "What do you mean by that? Are you accusing me?" The emperor's eyes flashed red. "Seeing that you are a loyal person, I have forgiven your insolence many times. Now you dare to accuse me? Good, very good. Arrest this Hellion Vivian as well and throw her into prison." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at the soldiers who were rushing over. Her gaze landed on the ministers of the Ministry of Appointments, and she suddenly raised her voice. These palace maids were summoned to the Palace of Heavenly Purity before they died. When they were found again, all the blood in their bodies had been sucked dry. Only a dried husk was left, and it was covered by the seaweed at the bottom of the river. If the river in the palace hadn't risen and drowned their corpses, many of the clues would not have been lost. It is because of the murderer's cover-up that the ministers have so much trouble solving the case. Speaking of the river in the palace, aren't the ministers curious? It is clearly winter and there is less rain. So why did the river rise? That is because you are misleading the public with your lies. Without waiting for Helian Wei Wei to finish speaking, the emperor interrupted her. His eyes were filled with hostility. Helian Wei Wei, I've given you a chance. Since you don't have the slightest intention of repentance, then I don't need to show you any mercy. Archers, get ready. Helian Vivian's eyes swept across the flaming bows and arrows. She slowly tightened her grip on the black umbrella, afraid that one of the arrows would hit Shao Qi. One of the ministers of the Ministry of Appointments cupped his hands and pleaded, Your Majesty, why don't you listen to the third princess consort? Perhaps her words will be useful. The emperor's facial muscles trembled again. His voice was cold. What? Elderly also wants to rebel? This old minister doesn't dare. But Elderly still wanted to say something. The emperor sneered and said, What can a lawless woman like her say? What can I say? I think you have all followed the third prince for too long and want to rebel. After being scolded by the emperor, the minister's voice trembled. This old minister didn't mean that. Elderly, I don't care what you mean. From now on, whoever pleads for leniency for that unfilial daughter will be punished according to the law. The emperor didn't give Helian Vivian any chance to speak. He couldn't let her speak anymore. This woman could actually guess so many things. Although she didn't say the key point, the spearhead was pointed at the palace of heavenly purity. If he let her continue, the matter of the river would be exposed. At that time, he would inevitably be suspected. Therefore, such a person must not be allowed to live. Chapter 628. The emperor's attitude was firm. The ministers could only worry helplessly. No less than hundreds of rocket launchers surrounded Helian Wei Wei in the center. The little one behind her was already bent over. Just by looking at his posture, one could imagine how painful it would be. Rise. The leader of the imperial army raised his hand. A swoosh was heard. The flaming arrows were raised and shone on the little one's face. Wait a minute. Look at what's on his body. The archer closest to the little one suddenly screamed. His finger trembled as he pointed at the little figure. His voice was filled with fear. The ministers, led by the elder, all looked at the little one. They could not help but be shocked. Little Seven's face was covered with scales. As the flames shone on his skin, the scales spread and covered his forehead. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted, Monster! Then, the people scattered in fear and wanted to hide as far away as possible. Their gazes on the little one were filled with disgust and fear. They looked at little Seven as if they were looking at a monster. The little one, who was already tormented by the pain, started to look around helplessly when he saw the reactions of the crowd. Even breathing seemed to be painful. Little Seven, Helian Vivian looked back at the little one while dealing with the rocket launchers. She lowered her voice and said, Hang in there for a while more. The little one could not move. He could only feel that something strange was expanding in his body. When he looked down, the back of his hand was covered with a thin layer of fur. When the elder saw this, he added fuel to the fire. Third princess consort, what else do you have to say? Look at the person behind you. Is he still our seventh prince? He's obviously a monster that's about to take shape. Little Seven felt like his head was about to split open. When he heard the elder's words, he shouted angrily, You're the monster. Come over here if you have the ability. See if I don't tear you apart. Helian Wei Wei had never seen Little Seven so irritable before. Under normal circumstances, no matter how angry he was, he would not say such things. He would only walk over and kick people a few times. But now, he was in such a state where his whole body was filled with hostility. It was a bit unusual. He's going to transform. Yuan Ming, who was observing this scene, suddenly opened his mouth and said to Helian Vivian in a low voice, Look at his eyes. They are starting to be dyed with color. The resentment in the surroundings is so deep. If its owner doesn't appear and it is allowed to transform into its beast form, not only will the entire palace be destroyed, it will also self-destruct. Hearing this, Helian Wei suddenly narrowed her eyes, turned around, and hugged the little one who was in great pain into her arms. Little Seven raised his head and looked at the person who held him in his arms. He tried his best to distinguish the person's appearance. He didn't understand why there were still people who dared to approach him. Weren't they monsters? Little Seven, wake up. Helian Vivian looked at the little one and held his shoulders with both hands. Listen, don't let your anger control you. You know that your third brother doesn't like to see people lose their rationality. Third brother? The scarlet in the little one's eyes weakened a little. He subconsciously tilted his head and a fire arrow shot towards them. Helian Vivian blocked it with her umbrella. The silver knife in her right hand flew out of her palm and flew straight towards the Imperial Guard's leader. That person was shocked and immediately defended. His palm firmly pressed against one end of the saber hilt. A layer of skin was abruptly scraped off by the thick martial chi. Helian Vivian didn't give him any time to react. With a flip of her hand, she grabbed the Imperial Guard's commander who gave the order. Her fingers tightened around the commander's throat and she exerted force. Creak. The person who gave the order was dead. The fire arrow became chaotic and was no longer as strong as before. This gave the little one some space to calm down. However, the selfish emperor had already made up his mind to kill. He turned his head and glanced at the elder. That elder understood the emperor's intention and ordered loudly, Young Masters, continue the formation. The Young Masters nodded. They raised their index fingers and pulled hard. The formation was formed again. Under the light, the pain in his body became more and more intense. Little Seven stared blankly at the people who were moving further and further away from him. He felt that this scene was very familiar. It seemed that he had been treated like this before in his memory. At that time, it seemed like someone had disappeared. His stomach was very, very hungry. However, he clearly knew that no one would feed him anymore. Also, no one would touch his head and ask him to take a bath in the river. He climbed to the top of the mountain and wagged his tail, wanting to find that person. In his memory, that person had always liked to be clean. He had a faint smile on his face and beautiful thin lips, just like third brother. However, no matter how dirty he made himself, that person still didn't appear. The villagers at the foot of the mountain raised the torches in their hands and looked at him in horror. They wanted to burn him to death. They shouted that he was a monster and threw stones at him. Those things didn't hurt him at all. However, he felt very uncomfortable. He wanted to tell those people that he wasn't a monster. He was here to find his master. His master was missing and they didn't see him. Then what happened then? Little Seven reached out his hand and grabbed downwards. Later, he found out that those people had killed his master. He wanted to take revenge. He wanted to tear them all to pieces. The little one raised his head. The faint golden circle around his eyes suddenly shone brightly and covered his entire eyes. From afar, they looked like two golden ambers. They were especially bright in the dusky sky. This made the people around him even more frightened. They screamed even more shrilly. What is that? A monster. Little Seven Prince is really a monster? Seeing this scene, even the officials of the Ministry of Personnel, who had just pleaded for Little Seven, cried out in fear. The emperor was satisfied. This was what he wanted to see. Whether the Young Masters came or not, a layer of scales would grow on Little Seven's body. This was something that he had been with since birth. He didn't expect that the Young Masters array would have such a great effect. It could make him grow hair all over his body. Although things were a little out of his expectations, it seemed that the result was better. This time, no one would say things like, the seventh prince is still young and definitely can't be a murderer, because the characteristics of a monster on his body said everything. Chapter 629. Fire the Arrows. Another group of Imperial Guards rushed over. Helian Vivian used the umbrella as a pivot and her body floated in the air. As her robes fluttered, countless rays of light surged out from behind her, forming a huge current of air. Together with her bleeding finger that she had bitten, She shouted the word, break. The golden string was broken into pieces, and the formation was gone. The Yin-Yang masters were forced to take a step back from the impact. Looking at the person who fell to the ground, he reached out and clutched his chest. Hellion Vivian was also injured. It was inevitable that her finger would be injured by the flying arrows. If she was alone, it would be easy for her to escape and fight, but she still had to protect Little Seven. Wave after wave of Imperial guards rushed over. Hellion Vivian's face was covered in ashes, but her eyes were frighteningly bright. The Imperial guards had never met such a difficult opponent. One person against a group of them, but they didn't retreat at all. They even began to doubt whether they could still capture the seventh prince. The Emperor looked at Hellion Vivian, who was blocking in front of him, and directly ordered people to bring oil barrels. He spread them in a circle and prepared to attack with fire. "What's that smell?" As they were fighting, Yuan Ming suddenly spoke. Hellion Vivian's nose twitched and her eyes darkened. She was smart enough to immediately guess the other party's intentions. They planned to attack with fire. "Little White, come out and carry Little Seven away first." If I could carry him, I would have done so already. The beast aura on his body has already affected me. I can't show myself at all. I'm afraid I'll go berserk. Little White's voice became lower and lower. Also, his condition isn't good. Just a little bit of blood will cause him to completely lose control. As they spoke, there was a loud boom. A huge fire was ignited and spread in a circle. The little person's hand was hanging down in the flames, and his fingernails were gradually dyed black. The Yin-Yang masters looked at the abnormally quiet little person in the flames. Their expressions gradually changed, and sweat appeared on their foreheads. Not good. He's going to go berserk. Once a monster goes berserk, it will become very difficult to control. It will completely lose its mind and suck everyone's blood dry. But in reality, they had lived for so many years and had never encountered a monster that went berserk. Firstly, it was because low-level monsters did not have the qualifications to go berserk. Secondly, when low-level monsters cultivated into high-level monsters, they would learn to suppress themselves and would not easily go berserk. However, the current situation was not within their expectations. They originally thought that since the other party was so young, even if it was a monster, it would be very easy to deal with. They had never expected that the other party would actually go berserk. This was completely different from what they had expected. Perhaps it was because it had dragged on for too long. The Yin-Yang masters' eyes darkened. They took out yellow talismans and used their minds to communicate with the people in the distance. "Young master, what should we do now?" "Get rid of him before he goes berserk." A voice as gentle as jade transmitted over, neither deep nor shallow, carrying a thick cough. "Be careful of Hellion Wei Wei. Separate her." "Yes, young master." The Yin-Yang masters held the golden threads in their hands and moved in unison, forming the 5 elements 8 trigrams formation. He couldn't afford to make the slightest mistake. He had to succeed in one strike. They are planning to use a vicious move. Yuan Ming reminded Hellion Vivian in a low voice. They should want to get rid of him before Little Seven transforms. Hellion Vivian's hand paused and blood flowed out. "Yuan Ming, does the agreement you made before still count?" No way." Yuan Ming's eyes were deep like the deep sea. "You want to give your essence to me for a little brat?" Hellion Vivian moved to the side and slit the throat of the Imperial guard that pounced on her. Her delicate little face was dyed red. "He is not a normal little brat. He is Beligaju's little brother. Before he returns, I will protect anything that belongs to him for him. Moreover, that is Little Seven." Yuan Ming did not speak. His handsome face revealed an evil aura. "As a demon, of course I want to obtain your essence. Because only by signing the contract of eternal life could he recover his original abilities and remember the memories he had lost." "Master." In the middle of the palace, the little person with a gourd on her back stood on the blue tiles. She slowly threw resentment into the air. "Is it about time?" Jing Wushuang looked at the flames in the distance and nodded. She lifted her finger and chanted. The black resentment that was rising was like countless black pythons that were entangled together and slowly wriggled. It turned into human faces one after another, rising from the layers of black gas. The ugly and twisted faces were squeezed together. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were numb, and some were excited. There were no eyes or noses, only a black hole-like mouth that was tearing. There was a sharp and hoarse breathing sound coming from it. It flew towards the two people in the fire circle. Looking at those things, the elder knew that the master had come. His eyes were filled with unconcealable excitement. As long as the master made a move, this Hellion Vivian and Little Seven would definitely be dead. The little person felt the thicker resentment from the outside world. Her originally round fingernails became sharp and long. Her blood-red eyes widened to the extreme. What are those? This time, the people were really scared. They had never seen such a scene before, so they all showed a frightened expression. They thought that those black little faces were emerging from Little Seven's body. Their fingers trembled as they shouted, "Your Majesty!" The Emperor did not expect such a situation, but for some reason, he felt comfortable from the inside. Especially when the black mist hit his body, he felt like he had drunk enough blood. It's the resentment array, woman. The other party still hasn't given up on the idea of taking your body. Whitey's voice rang out from the fantasy space. It turned out that Jing Wushuang knew from the beginning that these stupid humans would not be able to deal with Hellion Vivian. That person had never been an ordinary woman. Even if she entered the palace alone, it would make things very difficult. However, this was nothing to Jing Wushuang. What she wanted to do from the beginning was to awaken Enai Feng's reincarnation. Now was undoubtedly the best time. She had someone to protect, so she would not fight with all her might. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes. Once Enai Feng woke up, those who bullied Hellion Vivian in the palace would not have a good ending. He would not allow others to besiege her while he did nothing. There was a loud crash. Hellion Vivian was surrounded by small faces. A layer of sticky film that was invisible to the naked eye slowly wrapped around her body. It started from her ankles, followed her calves to her waist, and wrapped around her chest. Chapter 630. Hellion Vivian felt as if her body was being gnawed by something. The black fog blocked out all the light in front of her. His body was exhausted to the extreme, and even his feet felt weak. Those pitch-black faces were everywhere, seeping into the fog. The little one looked at the person in front of him who was covered by the black fog. His large eyes were filled with blood. Hatred tore his last bit of rationality to shreds. He clenched his small hands and roared towards the sky. Hearing the little one's roar, Hellion Wei Wei, who had fallen into exhaustion, moved her wounded finger. The finger was hanging by her side. The blood dripping from it seeped into the ground. With my life, I call upon your name. Master, that woman? The little one on the gourd froze, alerted that his movement was being hindered. He opened his eyes wide. What is she doing? Jing Wushuang did not speak, but the dream demon who was standing beside him rolled his eyes quickly. She's chanting, she's chanting. But once the array is formed, she can no longer use her magic. The little one furrowed his brows. No, it's not magic. The dream demon moved, as if he was afraid of something. Jing Wushuang narrowed his eyes and coughed heavily. Hellion Wei Wei, who was oblivious to all of this, only heard a low chuckle by her ear. That chuckle was full of magnetism, like golden gravel, slowly flowing out. Do you know that once you sell your soul, you will never be able to pass through the door of God, and will never be reincarnated? Light and shadow spun in front of her eyes, and there was a faint fragrance in her nose. Red spider lilies bloomed under her feet one after another, like flowing blood. Legend has it that the red spider lilies only bloomed on the road to hell. If I cared about the next life, I wouldn't have summoned you. Hellion Vivian floated in midair, and black fog flowed out from her fingertips. That was the lifeline that could summon demons the moment they were born. Hee hee. The low chuckle had an indescribable evil charm, like Yuan Ming's, but also not like Yuan Ming's. It was as if someone was merging with him, becoming a whole. Black feathers fell from the sky one by one. They were soft and beautiful, just like a scene from a comic book. I'll ask you one more time. Are you really willing to sell me your soul? Before Hellion Vivian regained consciousness, she spat out a few words. Shut up. Use my soul in exchange for my spirit. Demon, show yourself. As the last sentence of the incantation left her mouth, she fell completely unconscious. Those black feathers suddenly stood up in the air with a rustling sound. It flew up into the air, looking extremely beautiful. Amidst the raging fire, black feathers fluttered down, gently placing the sleeping Hellion Vivian on the ground. The devil's snare flowers that only bloomed in hell were now blooming on both sides of her. They were like flowers in tea, a breathtaking beauty. In the sea of flowers, the outline of a cold figure gradually appeared. That figure walked over, and behind his fur cloak was a soaring azure dragon and a blazing Chelan beast. He had a smile on his face that could make heaven and earth lose its beauty. His cat-like eyes narrowed slightly, emitting a golden color that symbolized nobility. His lips were very pale, shining like pearls. His slender fingers were wrapped in black gloves, revealing only an inch of his porcelain-white wrist, attracting people's attention. His posture was very elegant, and his black robe fluttered with the wind. His name in the human world was Beligaju. In reality, he was the demon who controlled the entire darkness and loved to play with people's hearts and destroy human consciousness. He tilted his head and picked up little Seven, who was in the array, with one hand. In an instant, the blackness on the little one's fingers began to fade. Even his scarlet eyes gradually sank, and he slowly closed his eyes. It was obvious that Beligaju had cut off his consciousness. Many immature divine beasts would constantly suck when they went berserk. They would not frighten you. Even when they were smiling sweetly, they would bite your throat and suck it greedily. They were just hungry children. In their eyes, humans were like milk bottles filled to the brim with milk. They were meant to be drunk. Their appetite was even bigger than that of an adult divine beast. Because they did not have a sense of good and evil, and did not have the rationality to suppress their instincts. Just like little Seven right now, his soft body was leaning in Bailey Jiaju's arms. With his thumb in his mouth, his little white fangs poked out. He was so handsome and flawless. From time to time, he would bite his thumb, looking like he was crying piteously for food. Beligaju frowned slightly, and with a cool expression, he held him with one hand. Of course, his action was not gentle, because the way he held the child was wrong. However, this did not affect his sense of oppression at all. The Imperial guards looked at him, and their faces showed fear. They retreated in panic and put away the bows in their hands. Fear surged from their blood. Your Highness, it seems that I have been away for too long, and that made you forget my methods. You even dared to touch little Seven? Beligaju laughed. His fangs bit down on his black gloves, and his thin lips gently spat out a string of laughter. The Imperial guards could not help but curl up together, and their faces were filled with unprecedented respect and fear. Your Highness, please listen to our explanation. All right, I will listen to your explanation. However, it has to be in hell. As he spoke, his eyes, which were filled with deep black marks, narrowed. The row of Imperial guards in front felt their hearts twisting into a ball. Starting from their fingers, they were burned by the blooming red spider lilies, making sizzling sounds. Beligaju seemed to hate this dirty scene, and he waved his long sleeves. Those Imperial guards did not even have time to scream before they turned into a pool of blood. When the evil spirits saw this scene, they fiercely narrowed their eyes. Although they were shocked by the sudden appearance of the man in front of them, they did not believe that a human could do anything to them. They opened their empty mouths and blocked in front of the man. Human, you better move away. Don't ruin our business. Beligaju's mouth was still curved, and his sharp white teeth were exposed. His handsome face was like a god, and he looked down at those evil spirits from above. He loosened his collar with one hand. Are you threatening me? You. The evil spirits had never seen such a bold human. One of them flew out and wanted to retaliate. However, before its teeth could get close to the man's face, the man grabbed it tightly in his hand. Chapter 631. Beligaju had a faint smile on his face as he exerted force. The thing in his hand instantly turned into a pool of black water. The evil spirits looked at this scene in disbelief. They sensed an unprecedented danger and wanted to escape. But Beligaju didn't give them the chance to do so. He walked past those evil spirits and ordered behind him, "Qilin, swallow them all." At this time, the evil spirits realized that the divine beast Fire Qilin was hiding behind the man. Their eyes shook violently, and a kind of unknown fear surged in their hearts. They scrambled to dodge, but it was too late. The Fire Qilin opened its mouth and swung its tail, sucking them all into its mouth and chewing them back and forth with its thick claws. The only thing that the evil spirits regretted before they died was that they had underestimated this man. One by one, they roared softly, but they couldn't change their fate of being destroyed. Next, Beligaju's thin lips curled up slightly, and his gaze landed on the trembling elder. "It's your turn." At this time, the elder was already affected by the other party and couldn't control his appearance. His arms and claws broke out of his body and clawed at the ground, wanting to quickly fly away. Tap, tap, tap. The man's footsteps sounded behind him, elegant and gentle, but bloodthirsty as life itself. The surrounding young masters were stunned by this scene, because they never expected that one of the four great elders was actually a demon wearing human skin. At this time, the demon was constantly kicking its hind claws, but the stone road under its front claws had already cracked, spreading over at a moderate speed, like a small stream of black blood that was crookedly flowing under the ice. It only felt that its back was cold, as if it had fallen into hell and couldn't break free. There was a bang. In the end, the bound monster was reduced to dust, and its flesh fell to the ground. The ministers were dumbfounded, and they couldn't come back to their senses as they trembled. That night, they saw too many things that they didn't even dare to think about. Amidst the howling cold wind, Bailey Jiaju's delicate yet grave and stern face raised an evil aura of a smile yet not a smile. Under the moonlight, his pure black robe reflected a kind of ghostly luster. His figure flashed, and when he reappeared, he had already directly landed on the roof of the opposite house. There was still a remnant aura of the exorcist tribe's guardian, but the person was gone. Only a dream demon was left behind. "You sure are quick to slip away," Beligaju sneered. When Dream Demon saw Beligaju's face, he was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. With a trembling voice, he said, "King, you are still alive?" Beligaju glanced at him condescendingly. He raised his hand and effortlessly made Dream Demon spit out a mouthful of black blood. Even so, Dream Demon didn't dare to resist. He trembled as he said, "King, I really don't know anything. If I knew that you were still alive, I definitely wouldn't have listened to the exorcist tribe's orders." Ugh. Before he could finish, Dream Demon's throat was locked by an invisible force. He touched his neck, and his eyes widened as if they were about to explode. Beligaju turned sideways, and his cold voice slid past his ears. "I have never cared about what orders you listen to. What I can't tolerate is that you touched my prey. That person can only be bullied by me. You? Heh, you are not worthy." Bang. Following the elder's example, another demon had self-destructed. Beligaju put down the little one in his armpit. With a move of his slender fingers, an exquisitely made silver earring appeared on the little one's ear. This was a device that the owner of the divine beast specially used to suppress their divine beast from going berserk. Then, he retracted his hand, and his ring finger pressed against his thumb, making a crisp sound. Pa. The earring was hidden. The little one made a sound, and the fur on his two little paws faded, revealing smooth skin. Azure Dragon couldn't help but look surprised. It is? Fire Qilin took a step forward and touched his chin with his front paw. "It should be the Tunshin." "This child? It's the Tunshin?" Azure Dragon was still doubtful. Fire Qilin glanced at him. "Don't forget, none of us have seen the Tunshin's human form. There must be a reason why Master pampers him so much." "You mean to say that Master pampers whoever is younger?" Azure Dragon never knew that he lost in terms of age. The bystanders couldn't understand what these two ancient divine beasts were talking about. Hellion Vivian, who was in a light sleep, felt that there was a lot of noise around her ears. She couldn't hear clearly due to her drowsiness. In the darkness, she tried to communicate with Yuan Ming using her consciousness, but he didn't reply. This made Wei Wei feel strange. According to reason, she and the other party had signed a lifetime contract, spirit and demon as one. This guy should be even more cocky. How come he didn't even pay attention to her and didn't pay attention to her? Hellion Vivian couldn't open her eyes, so she used her consciousness to call Yuan Ming's name again. This time, there was a response, but it was an unfathomable breathing sound, and it was very cold. Could it be that the demon was impatient after getting the human soul? The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she wanted to wake up. She knew the ability of a lifetime contract. After selling the soul to the demon's power would be 10 times stronger. Yuan Ming had said a long time ago that he had lost a lot of his magic power. In this case, his magic power should have been restored. What about Little Seven? How was Little Seven? Hellion Vivian used all her strength to move her fingers on the soft feathers. This huge change caused the Emperor to slowly narrow his eyes. He looked at Beligaju, and an uncomfortable feeling lingered in his chest. Was this still the third prince? Beligaju's martial chi had already surpassed the Emperor's expectations. Originally, he planned to use thousands of Imperial guards to subdue Third Prince even if he wanted to save Little Seven. But now, he wasn't sure if his Imperial guards would be of any use. Especially behind Third Prince, there was a huge azure dragon circling around him. Dragons, in ancient times, were a sign of good fortune. That was why people often said that the true dragon was the son of heaven. Now, a dragon had appeared, but it had appeared behind Beligaju. How could the Emperor not be jealous and angry? Some of the officials in the Ministry of Appointments had already started whispering to the Azure Dragon, and all of them were saying that Beligaju was the true descendant of the true dragon. Beligaju didn't say anything. The Emperor couldn't stand it anymore and said, "Third Prince, I don't believe that you can't see what Little Seven is in your arms. It's a demon. You're actually protecting a demon. Hand it over to the Imperial Guards now, and I can overlook your foolishness this time." Chapter 632. Demon? Beligaju tilted his head and looked at the Emperor with his long and narrow eyes. His eyes quickly reflected the image of an embryo that was about to take shape. It was a sign that a human was being invaded by evil energy. He looked at the Emperor and curled his thin lips. His voice carried a hint of indifference. "You know very well who is the real demon. The direction and flow of the moat can only be controlled by the Emperor's handwritten order. Those palace maids died in the moat. You're in such a hurry to pin the blame on others because you want to clear yourself of suspicion. However, do you really think that you can clear yourself of suspicion?" As Beligaju approached, the Emperor felt his breathing getting heavier. His left eye became a little blurry and the white of his eye was exposed. It rolled up fiercely, but he didn't notice it at all. Eunuch Gao, who was closest to him, fell to the ground in fright. He pointed at the Emperor's left shoulder and kept backing away. Fear was written all over his face. Only then did the Emperor look to his side, only to see a baby's head suddenly appear there, sitting on his shoulder. The lower half of the baby's body was buried in his back, as if it had grown out of his body. A pair of scarlet eyes were glaring at him eerily. The Emperor froze, and his whole body was cold. How could this be? What was buried in his body? Although he would hear a satisfied sigh every time it was time to eat the elixir, he always thought that it was his own sigh. But now, the Emperor was scared and shouted in panic. He no longer had the image of an emperor. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Men, come quickly. Take this damn thing away from me." However, no one dared to go near him. The ministers of the Ministry of Appointments screamed in horror. The Imperial Guards rolled and crawled 10 feet away from him. This time, the Emperor was truly alone. The most frightening thing was that the baby on his shoulder actually moved towards him, and the dead man's face was pressed against his face. The Emperor sat on the ground and screamed in a sharp voice, "Stay away from me! Stay away from me! Keep it away from you!" Beligaju laughed coldly. How stupid are you? You've sucked the blood of so many young girls, so of course you'll form resentment. Resentment gives birth to evil, and evil comes from the heart. In time, it will replace you and occupy your body. How could it give up on such a good nourishment like you? Hearing Beligaju's words, the emperor seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He lifted his face and looked at him pleadingly. Third brother, you must have a way, right? Quickly save imperial father. Li Jiaju didn't move at all. He only stood tall and straight, looking down at him with obvious coldness. When Hellion Vivian woke up, she saw this scene. That familiar figure stood in the midst of the flames of war. The azure dragon circled in the sky above, and the divine beast at his feet. However, no one or thing could withstand the waves in his eyes. That pair of enigmatic eyes flowed with faint golden circuits, reflecting his fair face. It was filled with a kind of enchanting feeling, like some kind of powerful force, a divine miracle that was extremely beautiful to the extreme. At that moment, Hellion Vivian thought she saw an illusion. She reached out and pressed her aching temples. When she looked again, that person was still there. She couldn't help but communicate with Yuan Ming through her consciousness. Her usually lazy voice became full of energy. Yuan Ming, did you see that? He's back. He's really back. Yuan Ming didn't give her any reply. Not far away, Beligaju moved his fingers with a black glove. He looked down at the emperor who was kneeling on the ground and planned to leave. In a moment of desperation, the emperor shouted, I am your father. Are you going to watch your father become a monster that is neither human nor ghost? Hearing this, Beligaju smiled. His thin lips had a hint of evil that made people uneasy. Don't worry, you don't have the chance to become neither human nor ghost. Because it's already awake, it should be hungry. What do you mean by that? The emperor was not stupid. Soon, a possibility flashed through his mind. He immediately looked to his left. That baby had indeed woken up. Its pair of empty eyes stared at the emperor. Its voice was cold blood. I want blood. Before the emperor could react, his neck was bitten by the baby. The gurgling sound of blood being sucked rang out, making everyone's hair stand on end and their hair stand on end. The faces of the officials of the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs were pale. They watched as the emperor reached out his hands, desperately trying to shake off the baby on his shoulder. However, because they were one body, they couldn't do anything. The emperor kept struggling. When he looked at Beligaju, his eyes were filled with jealousy and hatred. From the beginning, he knew that this child was a treacherous one. It had never respected him, the emperor, as its father. As expected, the older it got, the less it listened to his control. Now, it didn't even want to save him. Why didn't such a person die? Why was he the one who died in the end? God had clearly told him that as long as he did what he had to do, he would be able to obtain immortality. Could it be that God was lying to him? Crunch. The baby opened its mouth and broke his bones. The emperor could no longer struggle. He could only lie on the ground in a sorry state. Blood seeped out of his body as if he was in despair. His eyes gradually lost their light. When the officials saw this, they couldn't help but sigh. At the same time, they felt fear. They never thought that the emperor would become like this. They also never thought that he would be the murderer of the palace maids. They all knew that the emperor wanted to pursue immortality. But what they didn't expect was that the other party was already infatuated to this extent. In this world, you reap what you sow. If you don't believe it, look to the heavens. Who can spare you? The emperor's blood was sucked dry by the baby that had poked out of his body. In less than 10 seconds, it was lying on the emperor's neck. Its pair of faint green eyes were extremely terrifying. Of course, Beligaju wouldn't let it have its fill. He glanced at the azure dragon and said in an indifferent voice, "This one's yours." "Yes, master." The azure dragon thought that it was finally its turn. With a roll, it swallowed the baby into its stomach, leaving no trace behind. After that, the entire palace of heavenly purity fell silent. Beligaju began to pace again. His long legs and waistline were perfectly restrained. He still looked noble and indifferent. However, this time, The ends of his hair were suffused with a silvery white color that symbolized evil. It was the symbol of a demon. Hellion Vivian wasn't sure if he had seen her. He seemed to have seen her, but he didn't want to acknowledge her. Chapter 633. Suddenly, Hellion Vivian remembered what he said to her before she left. Even if I hate you after I go back, you still want me to go back with you? How could she forget that this person always kept his word? Just like now, he didn't even look at her. Her arched fingers gradually turned cold. Hellion Vivian moved her legs and wanted to get up, but she realized that she had lost too much energy. Even standing was difficult. She couldn't help but complain in her consciousness, Yuan Xiaoming, don't you think His Highness is too petty? He holds grudges and is hard to appease. If I didn't come back then, what else could I have done? He actually ignored me. Capitalists are really inhumane. Hellion Vivian originally wanted to vent her anger and drag Yuan Ming along with her. But this time, for some reason, Yuan Ming still didn't reply. That's strange. In the past, Yuan Ming didn't like His Highness that much. Why was he so quiet this time? On the other hand, Bailey Jiaju paused in his steps. His noble gaze swept past the green dragon and landed on Hellion Wei Wei. Hellion Vivian couldn't tell what he meant. His expression was cold and aloof. He even had a look that said, just you wait. It couldn't be that he heard her bad-mouthing him, right? That shouldn't be possible. He wasn't Yuan Ming. How could he receive her consciousness? He probably hated her so much that he was thinking of ways to torture her. Inhumane, Hellion Vivian said again. She even raised her fist. Other than anger, there was also an indescribable loneliness in her eyes. She felt a little stuffy in her chest. This feeling was really uncomfortable. At this time, people from the Holy Worship Palace arrived. Nangong Lai led the army to control the imperial guards that the emperor had arranged outside and surrounded the entire palace of heavenly purity. When he saw Hellion Vivian, his expression was very strange. It was obvious that he was different from before. His memory had been refreshed, so of course it would be different. However, Nangong Lai's ability to accept things was still relatively strong. After all, he was a priest who knew everything from astronomy to geography. He didn't care much about someone going back to the past and changing their memories. What made Nangong Lai feel difficult to deal with was Beligaju's idea of Hellion Vivian. At that time, after this woman left, Aju was filled with hostility, as if he had lost all hope in everything. When he killed someone, his eyes were cold to a certain extent, as if it had nothing to do with him no matter who died in front of him. He shut himself in the palace and no longer had any contact with anyone. Even the one from the Hellion family who sent him an invitation was rejected. From that day onwards, there was no one by Aju's side. Nangong Lai could clearly feel the hatred emanating from Aju. It was as cold as a cut diamond, perfect but hurtful. As a former ally, Nangong Lai felt that it was necessary for him to intercede for Hellion Vivian. He leaned to one side and blocked Beligaju's way. Aju, don't tell me that you're really going to argue with Boss Wei because of that matter? I don't think that what she did was wrong. Although until now, he still did not know why Hellion Vivian would suddenly return to the past and then disappear all of a sudden. According to that person's way of doing things, it should be something good for everyone. Beligaju did not even bother to pay attention to him. He walked past him and said without turning his head, "Shut up." After saying that, he walked towards Hellion Vivian. When he walked past the crowd, he was like a natural light source. Everyone's eyes were attracted to him at the same time, following his movements. Basically, he did not change much. His beautiful and deep eyes outlined a charming beauty. There was always a faint smile on his lips. However, his eyes were too cold when he looked at Hellion Vivian. It was so cold that even Hellion Vivian felt a little pain in her bones. Was he determined to treat her as a stranger and ignore her? Hellion Vivian's fingers brushed the black feathers on the ground. When she raised her head again, she found that there were two slender and straight legs beside her. She looked up along the legs. The handsome and elegant man had already walked in front of her. His eyes were elegant and handsome, but there was a trace of sharp indifference. The circle of fur on the shoulder of the cloak made him look even more noble. Beligaju bent down. His eyes were at the same level as hers. His expression was very cold. He used a strength that seemed to want to firmly lock everything that he saw and directly grabbed her leg when she was trying to get up. Nan Gonglai watched from the side with fear. He thought to himself, is Aju going to punish her here? Hellion Vivian frowned and met the man's gaze. Beligaju's slender fingers held Hellion Vivian's ankle just like that. There was a familiar smile that made people's heart beat faster at the corner of his mouth, but the coldness in his eyes made Hellion Vivian subconsciously want to escape. At this time, Bailey Jiaju pressed his voice into her ear and said in a deep and magnetic voice, inhumane, narrow-minded, vengeful, and hard to coax. And, hearing these adjectives, Hellion Vivian instantly widened her eyes. It can't be. He knew everything she was thinking? Yuan Xiaoming, he. Hellion Vivian still wanted to use the stream of consciousness. Beligaju directly pinched her chin. His breath blew on her lips. It was still very cold. Don't shout. Don't you feel the connection between you and me? Connection? Hellion Vivian looked down and saw that there was a pattern brand on her and Beligaju's wrists respectively. That was the symbol of a lifetime contract. When the owner sold the soul to the demon, the contract mark would be made. The creation of this symbol was to let the owner summon the demon at the first time when they encountered difficulties. Secondly, it was convenient for the demon to control the owner. Even if the owner escaped to the ends of the earth, as long as the symbol brand was still there, the demon could find the owner. When he wanted to, he could swallow the owner's soul. But why did such a symbol appear on Beligaju's hand? She clearly made a contract with Yuan Ming. Could it be you and Yuan Ming? You too? There was no warmth in Bailey Jiaju's voice. Slowly, he said, Yuan Ming is also a fragment of me. When the divine exorcism seal descended upon the world and I was reborn as a human, the remaining demonic nature became Yuan Ming. Later on, it was sealed in the ancient book and lost all its previous memories and spells. The eternal contract must be signed with the demon's primordial spirit, and I am Yuan Ming's primordial spirit. Hellion Vivian. So, when she chanted the summoning spell just now, she summoned the primordial spirit. The primordial spirit would definitely combine with the fragment to become her new contracted demon. That is to say, the recipient of her complaints just now was actually a certain highness. Chapter 634. Hellion Vivian thought about what she said and wanted to find a hole to bury herself in. Have you thought about how to face me? Beligaju put one arm through her ear and pressed on the black feather behind her, closing the distance between the two of them. With every word he said, his breath would hit her lips. This allowed Hellion Vivian to clearly smell the addictive smell coming from his body. Even the curve of his jaw was extremely sexy. No matter how she thought about it, she only thought about kissing him. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled evilly. Why don't you let me kiss you? Then we can continue talking. Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes with an icy chill. His fingers exerted force and pulled her entire body closer to him. His fingers pressed on her thin lips and forcefully crushed them back and forth. Do you think that I will still fall for this trick of yours? Since you're already back, can't you just pretend that nothing happened? Hellion Vivian had a smile on her face, but her heart sank a little. Bailey Jiaju laughed. His voice was cold. You want to pretend that nothing happened? Do you think it's possible? It's possible under normal circumstances. Hellion Vivian supported herself with her fingers. Beligaju looked at her with an indifferent expression. It's impossible for this king. Hellion Vivian felt that it was difficult to breathe. What should she do? She wanted to drag Beligaju over and ask him properly, but what did he want her to do? Do you have to make such a clear distinction between yourself? No matter if it's a soul fragment or your primordial spirit, to me, it's still you. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian was originally a person who didn't get angry easily, because she was a person who would directly stay away from someone if she didn't like them. If she liked them, she would protect them like they were her children. It was the first time that she used all her strength to speak like this. You're so smart, It's impossible that you don't understand. You're so arrogant because I like you. Helene Vivian grabbed the man's collar and growled, "If you're angry, then tie me up if you can. Why are you so cold?" After shouting, Helene Vivian's head was buzzing, as if she finally calmed down. She took a deep breath and said in a light voice, "You can think whatever you want. Since you're already back, you can hate me as much as you want. It's fine if you don't want to talk to me, but don't find trouble with me now. I'm tired." She was really tired. For so many days, she had been so tense in her mind until now. In the end, this was the result. She couldn't cope. She pushed him away, stood up, and wanted to leave. In the end, before she could even lift her leg, someone grabbed her wrist from behind. Her back was forcefully pressed into the other party's chest. A familiar voice rang in her ears, carrying a trace of mockery. "Why didn't this highness notice before that you like being tied up so much? Let go." Helene Vivian tried to calm her breathing. Beligaju sneered in her ear. "Let go? We've signed an eternal contract. From now on, you only belong to me. From the inside out, you're all mine. Do you think you can leave just like that?" Helene Vivian lowered her head and didn't say anything. Damn it, she had forgotten about this. This person only knew how to bully her. Helene Wei was so angry that she could not wait to bite him, and she really did so. She grabbed his hand and opened her mouth. In the end, it didn't fall. It was a sin to leave a mark on such a beautiful hand. It was rare that she was still thinking about beauty and ugliness at this time. Helene Vivian's eyes dimmed. Some people compared love to a game. Whoever used more sincerity would be the winner. There was no right or wrong. No one let down the other. It was about who liked who more. Who couldn't bear to part with who more. She couldn't bear to part with him now. Could this be considered revenge? He begged her so much at that time. He didn't hesitate to throw away his pride so that she could stay. She still left. Now that revenge had come, she said that she was tough because she never thought that it would be so painful when she lost. Half an incense stick's worth of time. Beligaju's voice suddenly sounded again. This time, he let go of her wrist. He didn't have that much strength. He only gently hugged her waist and pressed his lips against her left ear. Helene Vivian didn't understand what he meant. Half an incense stick's worth of time? Was he telling her that she was going to die? "I was cold to you for only half an incense stick's worth of time, and you couldn't stand it." Beligaju's voice was a bit hoarse. "Did you calculate how long it would take for me to recover after you appeared and left?" Helene Vivian was stunned. The image of that noble little boy appeared in her mind. He was cold and didn't like to talk. He also didn't get close to others. He only obediently waited for her to return. In an instant, her eyes turned red. Bailey Jiaju turned Helene Wei around and used his slender fingers to touch her eyebrows. Then, he lifted her loose strands of hair and kissed her forehead, eyes, and the bridge of her nose. Finally, he pulled her into his arms and wrapped Helene Wei in his fur coat, pressing the bridge of his nose against hers. At this time, Beligaju was very gentle. He was like a precious red wine flowing in the night. He was incomparably smooth and sweet. As long as he was willing, he could give her the most enviable love in the world. He said to her in a low voice, "After you left, I thought that if I see you again in the future, I will definitely break your claws and legs. That way, you can stay by my side forever." When Helene Vivian heard his words, she felt her hands begin to hurt. "But when I really saw you, I was thinking about how to fiercely take you. I wanted to make your legs go soft and cry for mercy. I wanted to make you unable to leave even if you wanted to." When Beligaju said this, his thin lips fell on her lips. Then, he fiercely bit down. It didn't hurt. Instead, it was a bit numb. Helene Vivian only felt her heart skip a beat. Her face burned a bit unnaturally. What was this person thinking in his head? "In order to make myself look less impatient, I didn't want to look at you. You really know how to make your presence known." Beligaju's voice was sexy and hoarse. It was so graceful that it was like a good musical instrument. Helene Vivian knew what he was talking about. It was nothing more than her complaints. How long would it take for this joke to pass? Moreover, the mockery in his voice was so obvious. Helene Vivian really didn't understand. What did he mean? Why didn't he just say that she couldn't forget him and was daydreaming? Or perhaps he wanted to say that she was very attractive to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kissed her so gently. But what did he mean by making his presence known? Chapter 635. Beligaju looked at the confused person in front of him, as if he had accepted his fate. Forget it. Anyway, your existence is a distraction to me. Wherever you are, I can't concentrate on anything. Was she as annoying as he said? Hellion Vivian showed an angry expression. She was pulled into the man's arms. His fingers stroked her long hair gently as if he was comforting an animal. He said in a mocking tone, "You're an idiot. Are you still not convinced?" Hellion Vivian stopped breathing. Her nose was filled with that familiar smell. It was so reassuring. Finally, they were all back. In addition to his kindness, there was also his unprincipled love for her. Although it was a bit poisonous, she was already used to a certain highness who did not mean what he said. Hellion Vivian chuckled and reached out to hug him. His waist was thin and strong, so it was very comfortable to hug. As long as Bailey Jiaju lowered his eyes, he could see the smile at the corner of her mouth. It was sly and innocent. She even used a pair of eyes to look at him. Her fingers moved around his waist. Once again, he questioned his own taste. How could he fancy such a little hooligan? Her claws were not quiet for a moment. Is it nice to touch? Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows, and the air of abstinence hit her face. Not bad. It's quite smooth. Hellion Vivian thought that in the future, these were all mine. She could touch them however she wanted. Beligaju smiled coldly and evilly. Seeing that you like it so much, I'll find a time later to let you touch it, but not here. It should be on the bed. Hellion Vivian was very happy. Is this a benefit? Yes, it's a benefit. Beligaju leaned over, and his thin lips slid past her ear. He was very black-bellied. Because of this touch, Wei Wei's whole body trembled. Beligaju was very satisfied with the effect he had on her. He let go of her and looked up. His gaze landed on the Imperial guards who were holding bows and arrows in the distance. His voice carried the coldness of a superior. You are still holding bows and arrows. Do you want to kill me as well? The Imperial guards looked at each other, not daring to move. But after all, they were directly under the Emperor's command. His Majesty had ordered them to surround this place. Beligaju stared straight at them as he hugged Hellion Vivian with one hand. His rosy fur cape fluttered in the wind. Behind him was a surging army. Every one of them was dressed in black and held spears in their hands. They were mighty and unstoppable. Someone recognized them. They were the shadow guards personally trained by the third prince. There was once a rumor about them. Once the 8,000 shadow guards were deployed, there would be no one within 100 miles of them. He had heard too much, but seen too little. At this moment, after seeing this scene, the Imperial guards who had been nurtured in the palace all year round were terrified from the bottom of their hearts. Those shadow guards stood behind Beligaju with masks on their faces. They were like a demon army that rose from the ground of hell. Every one of them stood upright, as if they were waiting for Beligaju's orders. The light reflected from the numerous silver knives made the old officials who only knew how to rely on the elder compound to panic. They originally wanted to denounce the identity of the seventh prince. Now, not to mention speaking, they didn't even dare to let out a fart. The Imperial guards knew that this was a battle that they had no chance of winning. Pa. Someone put down his bow and arrow and knelt on the ground. Following that, dozens, hundreds, thousands of Imperial guards knelt on one knee and bowed to Beligaju. All the ministers in the Imperial court had mixed feelings when they saw this scene. Among them were the fifth prince's men, the elder compound's men, and the emperor's men. This game of chess with the world as the chessboard had been going on for so long. They had never thought that Beligaju would be the one to obtain the throne in the end. Although he was very capable, he had never understood the ways of officialdom. No matter how talented he would still fall in the end. But now, looking back, the first prince had drowned because the Li family had bullied the third prince back then and had provoked the emperor's punishment by spouting arrogant words. The Morong family had been doted on by the emperor for 100 years. The emperor doted on Empress Morong, and the fifth prince even more. In the end, because they framed the third prince, they were imprisoned for life and their entire family was beheaded. Everything that happened seemed to have nothing to do with the third prince, but if one were to trace the reason, everything could not be separated from the third prince. Thinking of this, the officials couldn't help but shudder. Now, it was the emperor's turn to be possessed by a demon. The third prince was just enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and putting righteousness before family. The emperor's throne was rightful and justifiable. It was inspiring. However, how could the old officials, who had been dealing with officials all year round, not see through the trick? It was because they realized it too late that they couldn't help but feel a chill run down their backs. They thought that the third prince would be dethroned sooner or later. How much thought did he have in order to be able to control the entire court in his own hands? The first prince was gone, the fifth prince was gone, and even the emperor was gone. At this point, there was no longer any doubt as to who would inherit the throne in the future. There was also Helian Wei Wei. At that time, when this hedonistic good-for-nothing married the third prince, they even secretly sneered at her because of this. After all, the third prince, who originally didn't occupy an advantage in the imperial court, had a burden like this, which would only accelerate his defeat. In the end, not only did this woman become the world's biggest martial arts merchant, she even regained control of the Helian family. What was even more frightening was that she could actually make the hidden army recognize her as their master. When these two people were separated, it was already frightening enough. Thinking about how His Highness swept away thousands of troops when he appeared, and how many imperial guards besieged Helian Vivian, they actually didn't completely force her into a dead end. Now that they were merged, it was really hard to say what would happen in the future. Some of the officials' eyes faintly revealed uneasiness. Nangong Lai watched from the side. He understood the whole sequence of events, so of course, he knew what the officials were thinking. Those people must have regretted it so much that their intestines turned green. However, these people definitely didn't know that Aju already had the ability to fight for the throne. If he really wanted to get the throne, he could have led the army to abdicate 7 years ago. However, he didn't do that. Instead, he put down the chess piece in his hand and looked at him calmly. He said in a clear and noble tone, something like the throne must be personally delivered to me before I accept it. In other words, he didn't even bother to force the emperor to abdicate. To him, it was also a kind of beauty to get something perfectly. Later, after Helian Vivian heard the speculations of the officials, she had the opportunity to ask Beligaju himself, at that time, "Did you plan to kill the first prince from the beginning?" Beligaju looked at her and said slowly, "I did want to kill him, but the reason why I did it in the end was not because of the throne." "Then why?" Chapter 636. Because he had a thought that he shouldn't have, Beligaju pushed Helian Vivian away with his finger. His eyes darkened. How could he keep someone who dared to look at his prey with that kind of gaze? Then what about the Morong family? Helian Vivian felt that this person was getting more and more disgusted with her. He even pushed her away when she asked him a question. Beligaju looked at her coldly. "What do you think? Why would I keep someone you used to like there? I'm not that kind. Killing one is still killing. Killing two is still killing. It's better to kill all of them. It'll save us trouble in the future." Helian Vivian was stunned. Then she smiled. "So you're jealous. Does this count as being angry for a beauty?" As she spoke, she took out a mirror from the sleeping Xiao Qi and looked at it. Then she nodded. "It's indeed very beautiful. I also think that this face is too ostentatious." Beligaju supported his face with one hand and used the other to poke her cheek. "Don't you think it'll save us trouble if we destroy it?" Helian Vivian's hand froze. She didn't make a fuss anymore. She held the bowl and began to eat. Halfway through the meal, she couldn't help but ask, "Then what about the emperor? You raised so many shadow guards just to deal with him one day, right? If he didn't set his eyes on you and Tunshin, I wouldn't let the shadow guards surround the palace." Beligaju's eating posture was still noble and elegant. She couldn't see any trace of a demon on him. However, Helly and Vivian still felt strange. You can tolerate it so well? It's not like you at all. Bailey Jiaju glanced at her again and unhurriedly put down the bamboo chopsticks. He put one hand on the back of her chair and leaned back. His posture was very domineering. What's the point of arguing with someone who you know will die? Helly and Vivian. So it was like this. She was actually a little speechless. Finished. Beligaju raised his chin and pointed at her empty bowl. He gestured for the palace servants to carry little Seven away. Only then did Helly and Vivian realize that she had actually finished the second bowl of rice without any change in expression. When did she become so good at eating? What was even sadder was that she didn't feel full. One more bowl, Helly and Vivian said to herself. She would definitely stop after finishing this bowl. She did stop, but after dinner, she wanted to eat pastries and oranges. When she was picking out pastries, she couldn't free her hands, so she asked a certain highness to peel oranges for her. Beligaju threw an orange to her. It was obvious that he wanted her to eat it herself. Forget it. She didn't expect a certain highness to be gentle. Although the other half of a domineering CEO was more gentle, who asked her to be cold and arrogant. As Helly and Wei pondered, she turned sideways and peeled the orange peel. She was a very lazy person. If she could lie down, of course, she would not stand up. She just nestled on the furry and carved imperial consort's chair. She was wearing an ancient nightgown with large sleeves. When she stretched out her hand, her jade-like fair arms would be exposed. Coupled with her natural temperament, she gave off the feeling of a lazy cat, which was very charming. Helly and Vivian didn't realize how bewitching her posture was at all. She was still muttering, "The plum blossom cake isn't as good as the osmanthus cake." Beligaju had already taken off the fur cloak on his body with one hand and casually threw it to the palace servants who were holding fruits at the side. "You all can leave. I'll take care of this." Yes. The palace servants lowered their eyes and stepped back. They were very obedient. Helly and Vivian didn't mind. After all, compared to someone watching her every move, she preferred to stay like this. After eating the last piece of orange in her hand, she couldn't help but yawn. Before she could make a sound, she saw Beligaju walking over with a mysterious iron chain in his hand. Helly and Vivian's yawning hand suddenly stopped. Before she could react, he pressed her arm down and pressed her into the soft fur. His thin lips curled into a faint smile. "Originally, I didn't plan to tie you up, but after hearing what you said in the Palace of Heavenly Purity today, you seem to like being tied up. In that case, I can only comply with your request." "Who likes being tied up? I was just saying it casually. Can't you just pretend you didn't hear it?" Helly and Vivian said as she tried to turn around and escape. Beligaju pressed down on her waist and pulled her entire body back, making her sit on his lap. His tone was a little careless. "No, I can't. Who asked me to be petty and inhumane? I hold grudges and I'm hard to appease." Helly and Vivian. Isn't this over? Why is he bringing it up now? "Be good, don't move." Beligaju whispered into her ear in a low voice. His thin lips were practically pressed against the back of her ear. "I'll tie you up until you feel very comfortable." Helly and Vivian's body trembled. When she felt a numbing sensation in her ear, Beligaju had already made his move. He leisurely tied her hands with the iron chain. After he was done, he didn't give her any time to think. Almost in the next second, her nightgown was picked up by him. His coarse fingertips wandered wantonly on her bare skin. Helly and Vivian couldn't help but tremble, but she couldn't resist the man's invasion. Because of his actions, she felt as if she was suffocating. Her ears were burning, and her mind was filled with snowflakes. She lost all ability to think. The tall figure behind her was getting hotter and hotter, as if it was going to incinerate her. Beligaju smiled. His lips pressed against her reddened left ear, and he licked it with the tip of his hot tongue. Then, he slowly moved down to her fair neck. He nibbled and kissed her deeply, leaving a mark. His sandalwood scent seeped into her nose. As long as he wanted to, he could make a woman feel the highest pleasure. Helly and Vivian didn't move. If she moved, the iron chain would ring. That kind of sound would sound even more ambiguous. The bridge of his nose was pressed against hers. The tip of his eyebrows and the corners of his eyes were filled with a devilish smile. Not to mention, the heat from Bailey Jiaju's palm could simply burn her. His slender and slightly cold fingers stroked up, and the dense numbness finally landed on the softness in front of her chest. He gently held it. Hellion Vivian's body trembled. She felt as if she had been electrocuted. She couldn't help but let out a sound and reached out to push him away. "Don't." He pressed her hand down and kissed her neck, which was the most vulnerable part of her body. He sucked deeply, and his other hand hugged her tightly from behind. It was as if he was firmly holding her in his arms. Hellion Vivian could even feel his hard erection pressing against her urgently. Chapter 637. When Hellion Vivian woke up, it was already noon the next day. Of course, Baligaju was not by her side. There were a lot of things waiting for him to deal with in the palace. She knew that he would not be allowed to stay here. As soon as she got up, she saw Xiaoqi sitting by the bed with a meat bun in his mouth. His little face was full of guilt. "Third sister-in-law." Hellion Vivian smiled and rubbed his head. "What's the matter? I asked third brother today why you kept sleeping. He said that it was because I was too naughty yesterday. That's why you got hurt." Xiaoqi sat there with his two short legs crossed. His head was still lowered. "I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't want to turn into a beast. When I got my memory back, I remembered third brother. I wanted to kill all the Imperial guards with torches. I didn't expect to get you involved." Only then did Hellion Wei Wei realize that he had grown a tail. As he spoke, it swung back and forth, looking very adorable. However, His Highness was really good at shirking his responsibility. Was it good to be so shameless? "It has nothing to do with Xiaoqi. It's someone else's business." Hellion Vivian pinched Xiaoqi's face. "You said you got your memory back. Did you remember that you are the sky-swallowing beast?" The little one chewed on the meat bun and said, "Yes, I remember everything. It's just that my magic power hasn't fully recovered. Third brother put a silver ring on my ear. I can only turn into a mythical beast when I fight. Otherwise, I can carry third sister-in-law outside the palace to drink bean curd. Now that third brother doesn't allow me to fight, I'm bored." Hellion Vivian. "So that's why he's worried. Is that brain of yours filled with nothing but eating and fighting?" The little one shook his head. "No, I care about my image very much. Third sister-in-law, look at me. See if I'm more handsome after waking up." Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. "You're the most handsome in the world. Go to the Imperial kitchen and get me some meat. I'm starving." "There's no need to go to the Imperial kitchen." The little one stood up and his long tail hit the ground. When third brother left, he asked people to prepare a lot of food. He said that you can only eat when you wake up. "So good?" Hellion Vivian smiled and hugged her pajamas with both hands. She stood up lazily and stepped on the black blanket barefooted. She stretched out her hand and yawned as she looked at the round sandalwood table. There was a clay pot heating up on the stove. There were pork ribs, potatoes, and vermicelli in it, making it spicy. Sweet potatoes were added as well, making it fragrant. Not to mention, there were also lotus roots, vinegar white jade, 8 treasure duck, spicy beef, Buddha jumps over the wall, and spicy crab. Hellion Vivian was very hungry. Now that she saw these things that she liked, she picked up the bamboo chopsticks and began to eat the pork ribs. She didn't seem to be in a hurry. After all, she had cultivated a good habit since she was young. Even when eating, she was lazy. However, she ate too much. Lil Seven was chewing on a crab leg at the side. He looked at Hellion Vivian and touched the back of his head with his left hand. He was very puzzled. How did third sister-in-law become so good at eating? She ate more than him. He had already eaten 5 bowls of rice, but he was still eating the second bowl. Could it be that his ability had declined? Sigh, this was good too. As a handsome man, he shouldn't eat too much. In the end, the handsome man still ate more than 10 bowls of rice, and third sister-in-law actually ate 1 more bowl than him. This wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that third sister-in-law ate several oranges after she finished eating. The little one stood at the side, wagging his tail and sniffing his nose. He felt that something was wrong. The weather outside the palace became colder. The capital was like this. Once winter came, it would be so cold that people didn't want to go out. Especially when the weather was cloudy and foggy, it would be a vast expanse of white when talking. The emperor had passed away, so the imperial court had to do something. The ministers were all anxious. They stood in the middle of the south study room and didn't dare to raise their heads. Beligaju, who was sitting in the seat of honor, supported his face with one hand and held the booklet in his other hand. Every movement was perfect as if it was calculated. He didn't say anything, nor did he show a trace of displeasure. His noble and handsome side profile didn't show any joy or anger. He even looked more graceful than when the emperor was on the throne. However, the ministers who came to the court still felt an unprecedented pressure. Cold sweat kept breaking out on their foreheads. Everyone was worried about their future. After a long while, Bailey Jiaju seemed to have finished looking through the things in his hands. His pair of eyes faintly swept over them. I don't need to say anything. You should also be clear on what you did wrong. Drag them away. Your Highness, please spare us. The 3 ministers who had supported the emperor to besiege the 7th prince were dragged away by the masked shadow guards. The remaining people were those who had once stood on the 5th prince's side. They had originally thought that this was the end for them. Unexpectedly, that person just took a sip of tea and said in a clear voice, "Lord Liu, what's the matter with the booklet you presented?" Liu Yu was still thinking that he might be beheaded in the next moment. He didn't expect such a stroke of genius. However, for the sake of the country, he still straightened his back and reported, "There's news from the Xinyuan kingdom. Someone in the elder residence has noticed the changes in the court. They said that the seal in the capital may be broken. Once the divine exorcism seal is destroyed, the whole world will not be peaceful. They want to send people to guard it." Send people to guard it? Wu Jing couldn't help but say, "Go and ask them. If there's a fight over there, can we send people over to stop it? Fuck. They obviously have other intentions." Liu Yu coughed, reminding him that things were different now. He couldn't speak without thinking. After all, the 3rd prince was not the 5th prince. They weren't close to him at all. Moreover, in such a situation, they probably wouldn't survive today. However, what he didn't expect was that the person sitting in the seat of honor actually said casually, "My thoughts are the same as yours, General Wu. However, our methods are different. I don't like to travel mountains and rivers to slap people's faces. It's easier to kill them if they come over." Wu Jing was a general and had been on the battlefield all year round. He had never seen anyone as ruthless as the one in front of him. However, with such a person as the leader, they could be hot-blooded when fighting a war. He increasingly felt that the 3rd prince should be the one to sit on the throne. Liu Yu was a civil official and had always been thoughtful. He originally thought that since the 5th prince had been defeated, the 3rd prince wouldn't let them stay because of his ruthlessness. However, now it seemed that he was blind. This was how an emperor should be. In the past, Liu Yu helped the 5th prince because of his father. Now, Beligaju was like a fine steed meeting a bull. He could only accept it wholeheartedly. I thought that everyone in the world would know that Beligaju is mine. Is it not obvious enough? Mercenary. He said so much, including the purpose of this trip to the Xinyuan kingdom. He basically wants to slap the War Dragon Empire's face, and if possible, war might even break out. With so many important matters, how could young Miss only hear that little bit? He actually had a feeling of speechlessness. Shadow, who had followed Beligaju in, was even more shocked. He instinctively looked at his master's expression. After all, the word mistress was too ambiguous. Chapter 639. Bailey Jiaju leisurely stopped where he was and looked at the person lying on the small couch with a smile that was not a smile. Hellion Vivian did not realize that he had come in. She lowered her head and struggled with the orange in her hand. Her voice carried a hint of laziness, 100,000 taels of silver for meeting her. 1,000,000 taels of silver for admiring her, and 10,000,000 taels of silver for sitting down and drinking tea with her. The mercenary did not understand what Helene Vivian meant. "Miss, what is this?" "The royal family's appearance fee." Helene Vivian realized that she had finished the orange in her hand and wanted to take another one. Fortunately, someone was smart enough to pass it to her. Helene Vivian had just taken it when she heard a gasp. She happily peeled the orange and ate another piece before saying, "What's wrong? You think it's too expensive? It's fine. It's a waste not to take advantage of a girl like Princess Xianyuan. Just do as I say. The other party will definitely prepare the money." The little one who was eating with her heard her words, and her tiger-like eyes widened. She held half an orange in her mouth and tugged at Helene Vivian with her little hand. "Little Seven, why do you keep tugging at me?" Helene Vivian's voice was obviously weaker when she turned around. Bailey Jiaju tossed up the tangerine in his hand. The corners of his mouth curled up coldly. "Why aren't you saying anything? Continue. This Highness wants to hear what this Highness' other prices are." Helene Vivian choked on the orange in her mouth and felt guilty. Shadow and the mercenaries were smart enough to retreat. Beligaju glanced at the little one. The little one immediately stood up straight and gave Helene Vivian a look that said, "Good luck." Then, she left with a big pile of food. Helene Vivian felt that she must be having a bad year. She was caught saying bad things. What bad luck? However, after Beligaju said that, he didn't say anything else. Helene Vivian's eyes lit up. She thought of an excuse and said, "I'll go and see if the dinner is ready." Beligaju reached out and pulled open his fur coat. When she stood up, he pulled her back and pressed her into his embrace. His black fingers rubbed her wrist as he smiled devilishly. "If Madame didn't mention it, this husband would have forgotten. Since you're the one who bought me, then if I don't do something, wouldn't I be letting down Madame's money, in?" The last word made Helene Vivian's face burn. When His Highness said, "do something," he definitely didn't mean do something in the ordinary sense. "I'm very satisfied with you. You don't have to do anything on the chaise lounge anymore." "Really?" Helene Vivian looked at him seriously. Beligaju looked at her and smiled wickedly. "So you don't like this place? We can go to the South Study. I remember you were very nervous there." Helene Vivian felt numb all over. She felt his fingers move. She curled up in his arms like a shrimp and protested in a low voice. "What does this have to do with the place? This is a matter of the number of times." To her surprise, the man actually took his hand back and nodded with a smile. He agreed with her words. "This is indeed a matter of the number of times. Thank goodness, you're finally democratic for once." Helene Wei beamed with joy as she lowered her head and continued to peel oranges. She began to plan to free up her time at night in the future and go outside the palace or something. This Highness will increase the number of times as appropriate in the future. Beligaju's voice had a hint of evil. "You should be satisfied with this, right?" Helene Vivian quickly turned her head. "Increase the number of times." "You look very touched." Beligaju leaned over and kissed the back of her hand like a gentleman. The smile on his face grew wider and wider. Under the reflection of the fireworks in the city, it was incomparably charming. After all, this Highness is being kept by someone. This Highness still understands the rules. Helene Vivian. She doesn't look like she's touched at all. Also, don't say that I'm really a prostitute. That night, Helene Vivian realized how much a certain someone understood the rules. Her entire body was weak, and she didn't even have the strength to raise her arms. He still didn't let her go. He only said fiercely in her ear, "Let other women admire this Highness?" Helene Vivian opened her eyes wide during the thrusting. He was like a nail that nailed her to the ground. He was getting heavier and deeper, but he didn't move. Even his breath was hot. "If you like money, this Highness can give it to you. But if this Highness hears what you said just now again, this Highness won't let you go. Do you understand?" Helene Vivian's long legs were bent. Her body was already at its limit, but he stopped there and only rubbed that maddening spot. He wasn't willing to give her a quick end. Her beautiful phoenix eyes had already been forced to tear up just now. Now, there was even a hint of pleading. It was rare to see her like this. Beligaju's eyes darkened. His fingers tightened on her waist. Be good, beg me. Beg me, and I'll give it to you. Beg, ah. Hellion Vivian cried out involuntarily after the violent thrusting. The curtain moved with the waves and didn't disperse for a long time. Hellion Vivian was tormented so much that it was inevitable that she would feel sleepy. On the other hand, Bailey Jiaju woke up early. He stood tall and straight beside the bed, looking like he was already fully dressed. Usually, under such circumstances, Hellion Wei Wei would continue to sleep while he went about his business. But today was different. Hellion Vivian woke up early and was lying lazily in the quilt. There was a smile on her face. What should I do when I'm hungry? Baligaju smiled and bent down. He picked up Hellion Vivian along with the quilt and placed her in his arms. Hellion Vivian looked at the palace servants who came in like flowing clouds. She didn't avoid them and just let him carry her lazily. 2 strands of hair stood on her head and she yawned from time to time. Bailey Jiaju found it funny. He leaned over and kissed her. Then, he helped her wash her claws and let her rinse her mouth with peppermint water. Then, he carried her and moved her directly to the wooden table. Both of them were very good-looking. One was lazy and the other was abstinent and noble. When paired together, people couldn't help but take a second look. However, they had never seen a woman like Hellion Vivian in the palace. Any concubine would be shy and have scruples when they were favored, unlike the third princess consort, who had a wicked smile on her face. This made them lower their heads involuntarily. Hellion Vivian turned her head and whispered in Baligaju's ear, "Look, those little palace maids are shy. Don't move." Baligaju never had anyone else in his eyes. Even more so now. He calmly held down the person in his arms who didn't know what was good for her. His magnetic voice was pleasant to hear. Which one do you want to eat, the bun or the youtiao? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.